It's February 17th. We're in Montpelier at the Capitol Plaza, and we will start our meeting as we usually do with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Folks in the audience look like they've been here before, but if anyone has not signed up yet, there's a sign-up sheet over on the table here. And I want to start this meeting by congratulating Bill Mathis and Krista for being reappointed to the State Board of Education. They will start their full 6-year term starting in March, so congratulations.
Thank you.
And as you heard earlier, that Peter Peltz has also been appointed to the board and will start serving. Perry and I have been working on a resolution to honor Margaret's service, which I will bring up at the end of the meeting today. There's been one minor modification to what was circulated earlier, and Perry is emailing you each a draft of that, so if you want to look at it in advance, you have it. With that, members of the public that wish to be heard.
I'm the retired school superintendent. I think I spent 34 years in the school business. My last 14 have been here in Vermont as superintendent. I came in 1994. Since 1994, every year as the superintendent, when I had the opportunity to attend board meetings, 3 or 4 a week, I enjoyed all of them. One of the reasons I enjoyed them, and Mark will attest to this, those 2 years I spent in Middlebury, is I do a lot of daydreaming. And I would daydream solutions to issues that usually were somebody else's problems, but I would create a solution. Every year we saw the legislature during all those years create more mandates. I believe every year. I don't think there's been one year that this legislature didn't create more mandates. Every other year, I think they would reduce the budget for the agency. Both of those were double frustration. So I would sit at these board meetings and dream a solution. One of those great searches we did for a commissioner, now a secretary, we did always do a national search. One year we found a national search. The finalists were one guy and one gal. The state board had never hired a female to be commissioner, I believe. Finally, we'll get a high-profile commissioner from out of state. Female. I believe that after she was on the job 3 months, she would go to the legislature and said, I really like this job, but I don't have the staff to do it, so I quit. Well, Rebecca, it's too late. You can't quit and be helpful because you've created this enormous reputation of being intelligent, on the job, and insightful. My goodness. Were you born in Vermont? You might have even been born in Vermont.
I wasn't, but I wish I was.
So my old solution for getting the legislature to wake up and fund the agency so we can improve things, finally people are starting to talk about that. But this is, you know how tough times are. They've got to fund the agency. So Rebecca resigning will not help. But I do believe if the legislature doesn't stand up today and support the agency, that all members of the state board should resign at one time, perhaps in your May meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff. I'm sure Jeff is going to say we ought to resign earlier, but...
Good morning. I'm Jeff Francis. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Superintendents Association. I was thinking of making these comments at the meeting that you just adjourned with the members of the General Assembly, but I thought better of it for the sake of time. But I'll be brief. And I'm here to talk today about geography. And the geography that I want to talk about is the distance between State Street and School Street. And I want to preface my comment by saying that no one enjoys the extensive discourse on all the challenges facing public education more than I do. I like to think about them, I like to talk about them, and here in 2015, I hope that we are finally poised to do something about them. My observation is that public education as a policy topic is so rich that you can become subsumed in possibly every aspect of it. But in following Dr. Conley's comments, I would like us to pay attention to the analysis that your capable Secretary Rebecca Holcomb has done with regard to the current state in Vermont, because she's absolutely poignant with respect to her data presentation. The problems are known. They have to do with cost and quality and the structure of the delivery system. And my appeal to the state board is, despite your ability to get into all the reasoned discourse with regard to all these important topics, you remember that we are at a point in time where we need some very distinct levers in support of change that will be useful to what the construct for public education should be. I'll tell you, as a non-educator but a keen observer of public policy, that if we persist for the next 10 years the way we've existed in the prior 10, all of the problems that Secretary Holcomb has brought to our attention with the assistance of others are only going to get worse. So I understand political processes, I understand public policy processes. I think that the state board is maturing quite well with regard to its role as the policy-making body for the state of Vermont public education system in general. My appeal to you is to use your collective wisdom, and I would emphasize collective, to make sure that the General Assembly stays on course with actually doing something this year. And I think that the doing something must affect equity, it must affect opportunity, it must affect the ability to get well-reasoned and accurate measurement, and it has to affect affordability. Folks who say, well, maybe affordability is an issue, maybe it is not, I think don't have it right. Affordability is an issue just like those other important issues that face us. So I didn't want to miss the moment here in February, as we approach the crossover date in March, to ask you to stay on point with regard to not only what you do for any kid in Vermont, but what you're prepared to do for every kid in Vermont. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that, I didn't know what Jeff was going to say, but that leads me to probably the main point of today's agenda. Couple of changes. First of all, unfortunately, Robin Friedner is not able to be here today for item 8, so that'll be probably on the March or later agenda. And it's been suggested to me that we take up item J, the governor's educational agenda, with the secretary and with Allie Richards first, and then we will go to the legislative committee. And the point is that, just very quickly, when Bill and I testified last week before the House Education Committee, they had a couple of questions that we couldn't answer because we hadn't brought them before this board. So my hope is to broaden that a bit today, apropos of what Jeff was just saying and judging the climate across the street, is that I'm going to ask Bill to lead us through the ingredients of the House bill and see if we can come to a consensus on those various points, which will allow Bill then to write a memo and get back to the committee. So that's probably going to be the main focus of today's meeting, and hopefully we can do it by consensus and not have to take formal votes. One of the things that I tend to forget in this agenda is to do board introductions. So Mark, would you start?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Mark Perrin from Middlebury.
Krista Healing from Jeffersonville.
Stacy Weinberger, Burlington.
Stephen Morris, Newfane.
Rebecca Holcomb, Secretary of Education.
Sean Marie Oler, Bennington.
Bill Mathis, Goshen.
Morgan McIver, Plainfield.
Bill McAllister, Greensboro.
Are there announcements from board members? Sean
I
Marie.
would just like Charlie to introduce himself. Are you here for the Standards Board?
I am. I'm substituting for Stephen Johns. He has made the trip up to Montpelier so many times that I didn't make it. So I'm here on his behalf, but I'm also a member of the Montpelier School Board.
Thank
Welcome.
you.
Welcome. Any other, Krista?
Just two. So first one, I connected with Nancy Lavarnway, who is a teacher at South Burlington, but also commissioner for the Vermont Commission on Women, representing Norwich. And she was just named chair of the Ed Committee for the Vermont Commissioner on Women, and is very interested in making connection with this board and making connections between those two committees. So we decided to informally meet, but at some point she would like to come to the board, and I think there's going to be an invitation for us to also reach out to them. They're very keen on looking at women's issues, especially in education, and really they've been going through acts of legislation and really going through what does this mean for women. So that's just another lens to think about. So I'll keep you updated with meetings with Nancy Lavarnway. And then also New England Area Secondary School Consortium. I just want to let you know that on March 27th in Massachusetts, there's going to be a regional meeting where they're going to talk about district and school leadership and organization structures, which seems very appropriate for what we're talking about. So I was planning on going to that. There's also some web, some webinars, I think, that on the March 3rd and 18th leading up to that, talking about different organizations of design. And by March 27th, they're going to have a draft prototype of school organization, and recognizing that every state's a little bit different, but just sort of what are those school organizations, what's helpful. And I think a lot of partners around New England are looking at that, not just Vermont. So just letting you know that those are out there, and if you want more information, I can forward you any of those access for the webinars.
Yes.
So I've mentioned before, Dylan and I are part of a class, dual enrollment class through CCV, with Helen Beatty, the director of Up for Learning. And it's about communicating school redesign with the coming changes from Act 77 that are happening. And just as a little announcement, Twinfield is creating some PSAs to play on the radio. We're working in collaboration with Jackie Batten at WGDR, and we hope to air those by the end of March, of course pending the production of them. So more to come on that, but keep your ears open on 91.1.
Other board comments? Bill?
Yes, I just wanted to mention NASB and the reauthorization of ESEA, which is undergoing quite the interesting warp speed fervor after lying dormant for 7 years. It appears that the House is going, you may have some information on this, Rebecca. The House will probably follow the Senate kind of version, and the Senate is Patty Murray is the ranking minority person, and Lamar Alexander is the majority. Their staffs are working right now on what the nature of the accountability system will look like, and what is the state role, what is the federal role, what's the role of testing. These are very huge issues. It looks like they're going to get more state authority. The nature of that, I don't know, but it could affect EQS a great deal. There's a big debate on whether to do annual testing or whether grade span testing, and I'm hoping it's grade span testing. And anything we can do to talk to Bernie, I'd appreciate your view on where Bernie is in those situations. But I think it's absolutely huge, and that will influence and directly influence that entire EQS conversation that we were having with the legislators, and actually the nature and purpose, and whether we're a narrow test-based or whether we have a broader kind of focus on education. So now's the time to act on that. I've been working on some issues about testing and the use of testing with other people around the nation, and we're getting what I feel to be a good response, but I'm just not at all sure which way that game's going to go. Can you elaborate from your
think that was.
You have lots of sources on this stuff.
Well, it's funny, I was talking to someone in the legislature who was worried about how we were focused so much in the legislature, and I pointed out that actually we're very focused on what's going on in the U.S. Congress, because that's about 70% of our budget, so we're really watching that pretty closely right now. We actually did go down to Washington a couple weeks ago and met with Representative Sanders' staff, as well as some staffers from Patty Murray's office and some of the other representatives, and we did convey some of our concerns. We shared some of this body's documents, so they have, for an example, your statement on assessment. And we've been advocating quite strongly, both on behalf of Vermont's broad vision and commitment of education, that our priorities are quality and equity, and that we really define quality much more broadly than federal law currently does, and that we have some concerns about how the excessive reliance on testing maybe detracts from some of the other goals that we see as absolutely critical to helping our students prepare for life in democracy and in civic life and in economic life beyond school. And I think that there was a lot of receptivity by Senator Sanders to that. There's also a strong interest in his part on trying to work with other Democrats as much as possible. So that is where that conversation is currently. We are also networking quite extensively with other state agencies around the country and finding a lot of similar sentiment in other particularly small rural states where some of the adverse effects of this test-based accountability have been really most difficult, and also in many of the New England partners. And I think there is some interest in looking at increasing state accountability or state responsibility for figuring out how to develop a system which better serves local needs. In terms of where we'll end on annual testing, I don't know. How we end up on that will affect the resources we have available for education quality reviews. So we're sort of in a wait-and-see position right now, looking to see where the conversation goes. My sense is no matter what happens, we'll probably be in a slightly better situation if it is reauthorized, because certainly the majority seems to be predisposed towards more flexibility. So that may be a net step forward for the state of Vermont as well, and we'll keep you posted. I think one of our biggest concerns, and John Fisher is going down again this week to meet on 21C resources. These are resources that are allocated specifically to support extended learning opportunities, including after-school and summer programming. It is the sole state-level commitment at this point, because there is no state support for extended learning or after-school learning, except indirectly through the Education Fund. And we see this as an absolutely critical tool in our equity toolkit. We know that, and you've spoken eloquently to this group, Bill, about how about 60% of the variation in test scores is associated with family socioeconomic status and the mother's level of education. If we're going to make a dent, if we really are committed to equity, we have to find ways to expand opportunities to learn for kids growing up in high poverty backgrounds beyond the traditional 9 to 3 school day, 175 days. And so we are very concerned about losing that 21C pocket and looking forward to finding ways to hopefully augment it moving forward. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I mean, we'll keep you posted, and we're continuing to monitor that. We have sent a series of position papers outlining what we think of as critical for reauthorization. I can make sure I've shared them with Bill, but we can make sure that we share those with the entire board as well, so that you know what our priorities are. What does seem to have, people do seem to respond to, is our demonstrated commitment to equity, the absurdity of federal policy in our local context currently, and the fact that we are, despite it all, consistently a high-scoring state relative to other states nationally, and that puts us in a good position as a case study moving forward. Our one concern is that that there is some interest, particularly on the minority side, to have flexibility come in the shape of pilots, which might be pilots districts within states, and it really wouldn't meet our needs. And in that case, we would embrace continuing under No Child Left Behind as is, because frankly, we're in a situation right now where the shaming is more symbolic than anything. And I think because it is so patently absurd, I think people are beginning to understand that we really have to look at different data and different indicators to try to evaluate the quality of what our systems are doing, which isn't to say that I worry a little bit when we talk too much about how tests aren't powerful, because I think without these tests, we would not be aware of the magnitude of our achievement gaps, which are large. We also would not be aware that it appears that our gap for kids with disabilities is increasing, and possibly our gap for kids in poverty is as well. So we need these measures to help us attend to and place priority on addressing those needs, but we shouldn't then punish systems for failing to meet unrealistic performance thresholds because they happen to serve a high proportion of kids who are living in poverty, for example. So I think that addresses most of it.
Yeah.
Other board members' announcements, Bill?
Oh, that just raised another kind of question. I remember wondering if you've seen it in the Vermont numbers. Are my suspicions correct that some towns are getting poorer and some are getting richer, and a lot of the gap is increasing in terms of geography?
What we see is that the districts that are currently growing, that are not
Yeah.
Burlington, are more affluent towns. And what we do see is some relocation of people who have portability or mobility into places that have been able, I think, to maintain their budgets. We were in the process of beginning to how to analyze that more analytically, but then the legislative session started. And we'll come back to that analysis when the session's over. But that is my concern, exactly. And when you look at, we've been spending a lot of time looking at some of our data, both on our size and also on the demographics of our districts. And one of the things that has made Vermont different from many states is that if you go to many of our more urban states, they have a lot of schools that are 100% high poverty kids, and then systems that have almost no kids living in poverty. In general, our systems have been more diverse. We tend to have both high poverty and more affluent kids in the same system. My concern, as you are suggesting, is that we are seeing some anecdotal signs that we are becoming more like the rest of the country, and that's a really profound.
Scary.
It's a really, really scary trend, if that's the case.
Other comments from board members? If not, I'll go back to the consent agenda. I believe the only thing that's on the consent agenda this month are the minutes from the January board meeting. I would entertain a motion. Moved by Sean Marie. Is there a second? Krista seconds. Any discussion? And if not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no, and we've approved the consent agenda. My report would have been on legislation, so I'm just going to leave that, and I will chip in with the conversation when we get to that later in the meeting. Yes, student emails? Is that,
No updates,
okay?
unfortunately.
All right, we'll move on to the secretary's report.
Okay, I'll try to be brief, and I won't, Jill's going to come up and do the legislative piece in just a second. I wanted to give just a couple updates that you may have heard about, but also just to provide an opportunity for you to ask questions if you do. The agency did present its budget last week, and I just wanted to call your attention to two issues that came up in the context of our presentation, so that if you have questions, you can ask them here. The first of all, one of the probably the biggest change, or the biggest single change in the budget, is that we are asking to repurpose the EEI grant, which has historically been an incentive grant to support the initial implementation of early education or pre-K programs. So it's been in existence for years. Its original intent was sort of seed money to help districts begin implementation of a preschool. We are repurposing it, or asking to repurpose it, because there are several conditions which really make this grant sort of a non-issue at this point. The first is that with the advent of Act 166 and universal pre-K, any district that chooses to can draw down support that's greater than what they would have access to from this grant to support pre-K and initial implementation of pre-K in their system. So we're encouraging all of our districts to move ahead with Act 166 if that's what they choose to do. In addition, we have a separate Race to the Top implementation grant that provides access to $8 million a year, I believe, far in excess of what this initial EEI grant would do, so that there are additional resources there coming in for the same purpose, so that this grant was small in comparison and duplicative of that purpose. Repurposing it allows us to do several things that we actually feel are critical. First and foremost, it will support some positions at the agency to support initial implementation of pre-K. This is a big lift. We've added a lot of entities to our education system because we've expanded the network of bodies that provide access to education in the state. There's a lot of technical issues around implementation that we need to be able to support, and there's an awful lot of sort of approvals and reviews that need to happen in the context of this piece of legislation. So we really feel that additional staffing is critical. We've found ways to basically suspend hires or leave positions vacant in the current year to help support some initial work around pre-K, but moving forward, we need a more sustainable solution for this big lift, and this is one of the proposed solutions. The other piece is that we've been going through a review of our funding sources at the agency and how they align to our statutory and federal obligations, and I think it's fair to say that we are structurally out of balance in that our heavy reliance on federal funds to meet statutory obligations has left us with very little flexibility and is leaving us drawing down federal funds faster than they're being replenished, which is problematic, especially when given what's going on currently in Congress. So we are also proposing to use some of this money to support some of the implementation of the Smarter Balanced Assessment, which also meets statutory requirements because we're also required to do it for those purposes. So we're trying to find a way to offset some of those costs. And another piece of it will go towards supporting some of the work around education quality reviews to put in a little extra capacity to support some of the kinds of work we want to do around data analysis and review and visits of schools. There's some other pieces that we're putting in place to try to build and augment capacity as positions come open. We're systematically reviewing every one with respect to our statutory obligations, and where possible, trying to either find alternative ways to meet needs or systematically repurpose some capacity towards the critical work that we have in front of us. The agency has committed itself as its two primary goals to support full implementation of EQS and to look for ways to increase efficiency, to minimize time spent on compliance tasks so that we can maximize our efficiency around implementation of EQS, which we really feel as the tool is the most powerful tool we have to support improvement of learning in schools right now. So that's sort of the larger context behind that request. The other piece that came up in the context of the budget is that last year the legislature asked the NEA and the Vermont Standards Boards of Professional Educators to work together to resolve some differences around licensing requirements for teachers. And they've since come up with a new proposed set of rules for licensing, which are going to be in effect moving forward. Unfortunately, the challenge of it was that this happened after we had finished our online licensing system, so we have some new costs associated with reopening that platform and retooling the online platform to reflect the new rules. And the new rules also are going to cause a 20% shortfall in our licensing fees for the next 5 or 6 years, I believe it is. So we are down substantially in terms of revenue to the agency, and we've had to pull some staffing away from other divisions to support licensing moving forward, which is an unfortunate blow. And it's part of why we have asked for a modest increase in our licensing fees, which we haven't done in many, many years to try to help offset some of that. It won't cover the full gap, but it will hopefully be a step that direction. And we're looking at other ways to address that shortfall. The other reality is that we have started to systematically go through what we need to do and think through what's nice and start pulling out some of what's nice. We just cannot afford, particularly in that division, to offer the breadth of services that we've offered in the past. We just don't have the capacity anymore. And we're going to focus on our core mission of making sure that our educators receive their licenses in a timely way so that they can be gainfully employed with a minimum of disruption. And that will be our primary focus in that division moving forward. In terms of other issues that are on our plate, I did want to just call attention again that we will soon be opening the Smarter Balanced Assessment and beginning to test for the first time using the new computer adaptive test. There are some big advantages to this test, and I'm going to just say this again publicly because I do believe that testing does have a valuable role. As I've said, it helps us identify our gaps. This test is a better test than previous tests in that it does provide more accurate assessment across more grades. It tends to have a 4-year grade span in terms of the difficulty of problems that every student has access to, so that it will give a slightly more precise set of feedback for teachers to use as they plan instruction for each individual child. That said, it also is imperative, and it would be irresponsible not to take some time in this transition to reflect on what these tests can and can't tell us, so that we can speak powerfully to their use, their appropriate use in supporting education, and counteract claims that really undercut public faith and public education in ways that really aren't warranted. So I put that out there, and because I think we really are counting on the board to take a strong role in that, in supporting our schools as we move forward. The test, even though it is by requirement of the U.S. Department of Education, is still a grade span test, so it will not capture learning by students who are far above or far below grade level. So that that even if teachers have done a tremendous job, I mentioned, I think, this teacher before, speaking to a teacher in a system. She was a high school teacher who taught kids who were far below grade level. Even if she got 2 to 3 years of gains, that would not manifest itself in the test. We need to be mindful of that, because we want to encourage and reward and celebrate skilled teachers who embrace the challenge of teaching students who need them the most, and so we really need to be mindful of that. I'm also concerned, and you are aware, because we shared it, of the continued reliance on performance categories that attach normative labels and seem to imply predictive validity to how students score. So when we label kids low performing year after year, we feel that discourages kids, including kids who may be quite successful in college and careers, but they're just not ready yet to demonstrate that. We're also worried that when we imply that you have to meet a certain level to be successful in life, that we may end up discouraging the kids who need to pursue the most, even though there's no evidence yet to say that those claims are actually legitimate. So we are really going to ask for your support in helping people use this. We have been successful in getting Smarter Balance, the Technical Advisory Committee, to commit to putting together a white paper. And they expect it to be available for release on February 28th. We will send that to all of our superintendents and schools so that they can share it with their public and help educate their public about what we can and can't infer based on these test scores. I need to tell you that this will be a very challenging test. Based on my initial review of the standard setting process, we should expect that up to 2/3 of our students may score as not proficient at the high school level. If you've taught, Krista can elaborate. She could design a test that every single person in the legislature would fail. She could also design a test that they would all pass. We need to be very careful of what those standards do and don't tell us. To help further that conversation, we're working to try to have members of the legislature and the media sit down and actually take the test, the high school math test, so that they can speak to what it is and is not involved in that.
We'll
in that
publish
assessment.
the scores.
Well, we're not going to have individual scores, because if we did, I don't think we'd have any takers. But I did have one who said to me that after I issued the challenge, he looked at the sample test online, and he said he was very glad he was not in high school today. So I'm not saying that this isn't valuable, that we don't believe that our teachers need to challenge our students and constantly push them to do more than they think they can do, because we know they can. But we need to not be, we need to be just mindful about what is the level of challenge that's actually implied in these tests, and not use it to judge the young people leaving our schools. So that was that. And then the last piece, if there are any questions, I'd be happy. Otherwise, I'm going to, okay?
Are you going to have them take it on a computer?
Oh, yes. Yes.
I have a way back question just about the
Okay.
repurposing of the EEI grant. I just was curious if you could speculate about how many positions you think that might be able to.
We're looking at 2.
Okay. I think for perspective, that's helpful too, right?
Okay.
Let me follow up, and this may be delicate, and, I know that there's a projection of a $118 million deficit. And I understand that the administration is not asking for any new funding out of this budget, obviously for the financial reasons. But I was surprised this morning with the House Education Committee members, there seemed to be some support for looking for new funding for the agency. Now, obviously, at this stage of the game, we're a long way away from that actually happening. There's the other chamber. There's another committee or two that would have to go through, even if there was a majority in the House Ed. So the question is, how are you going to handle that when that actually comes up and there is some proposed new funding for the agency? That's the delicate part of it.
As in, what would I do with it?
No. How would you respond to that?
I think the way to frame it right now is that, I mean, currently we can't actually fill all our vacancies. So what we are in the process of doing is figuring out what it is that we're statutorily obligated to do. And we are doing those things. And then what is it we'd like to do beyond that? And that would involve the education quality standards and full implementation and support of those. What we are increasingly saying to other efforts is we can't do that. We do not have capacity to do that because really we're at a point where we have to make choices. I want an island in Hawaii. I can't afford one. I'll never have one. What we're in now is the zone of reality. What is it that we can actually afford, and what is it that's high leverage that we actually think will support better learning for children? And how can we minimize the time we spend on technical work and compliance tasks that, though important for the purposes of public assurance, don't actually improve learning for our students, so that we can free up as much capacity as possible to support that. We're also making some strategic choice about how we fulfill certain tasks. So, for example, we don't currently have capacity to fully support reviews of rules, so what we are doing is contracting with people who have expertise in those areas to do some rule review and initial preparation, development, and research for us so that we can shorten the amount of time that the agency itself has to actually spend on some of those tasks. There's small tasks that are discrete and easily bundled that we can outsource. And so we will be making some strategic choices like that as well. But I think that's the challenge. It's really helping people understand the implicit trade-offs and costs behind some of the decisions that we've made. Another place that we're addressing it is when, for example, a piece of legislation comes out and it says, could we do another survey or could we have another task force? We're saying you do need to understand that if we have another survey, first of all, this is duplicative of this other survey we already do. It has the same weaknesses because of X, Y, and Z. And if we are going to staff and support this task force, that means we have to take resources from such and such and such and such. Because at this point, we do not have free staffing or capability. So any new initiative or any new work task is pulling from some other priority that's perceived as important by somebody else. And by trying to make that more transparent, we are hoping that we can help all the bodies that we interact with understand what the trade-offs are in the context of our current work and our current resources.
We may come back to this when we're talking about the legislative agenda, in that and we talked about it some this morning, is that if there is increased responsibility to look at governance issues on the behalf of the State Board of Education, and I always commend you and your agency and how you staff us very, very nicely now, but the question I'll ask later is, can that happen with this new responsibility? And so,
right. Well, I think I just need to say one more thing. I think we need to understand that something is happening around governance anyway in the field. We are hearing from more and more districts and more boards and more superintendents that conversations are beginning. And I think as that happens, regardless of what happens across the street, there is going to be a need for us to be able to provide systematic, high-quality support to systems as they make transitions. So part of our current conversation is how to protect the capability within the agency to support that work. Because these are big decisions for districts, they are weighty decisions, and we need to make sure that they have access to both legal support and other kinds of technical assistance in that, regardless of what the legislature chooses or chooses not to do.
Did you have one more point that or are you done with your report?
Well, it was just really an elaboration on the last one, in just that I am concerned, and one of the things I am appreciative of this body for is that it helps provide a degree of stability. The downside of many of the political positions is that they're on a short-term horizon. Because of the length of your term and your continuity, you are able to play a deliberative, thoughtful, stabilizing role in our system that is incredibly important. And one of the things that really worries me is that indecision, and I think Jeff had mentioned that we really need to move. I agree, we need to decide which way we're headed, because the cognitive stress on our systems and our schools of just trying to figure out where they're headed and what's going to happen is profound. And they are also unable to engage in forward-thinking planning and think strategically about their futures because they don't know what's going to happen, and they don't want to engage in challenging processes if those will be upset by legislation moving forward. So really just wanted to add my voice to that plea, and I'll be quiet and let you move on.
Okay. Any other questions of the Secretary? Bill?
3 or 4 that are, I hope, very short. EQS. in thinking about costing that out, and were you thinking of having visitation teams go to schools as well as supervisory unions / districts?
We cannot afford that right now. We cannot afford to review every school every 3 years. At this point, we don't have the
But
capacity.
every 5 years.
We have been very hesitant about committing. We will do as much as we can, but until we know what kind of flexibility we get under any reauthorization of ESEA, we won't have a clear sense of the flexibility we'll have with respect to use of federal funding for that purpose. So at this point, our push in support for these measures has been around targeting SU level visits with some deep dives within SEAs and within SUs and trying to hit about a third of our SUs every year to provide some kind of collaborative review within the context of those SUs or SDs every 3 years. I understand the desire. I think the power of the school quality reviews is at the school level.
Yes.
I 100% agree with that. We do not currently have the capacity to do that. What we do have is an ability to provide more robust data to across a broad spectrum of measures every year. So one of the tools, for example, that we're piloting this spring is a series of surveys that can be used around school climate and student engagement that we would for which we'd be asking for the input of teachers, parents, and students so that there would be student, teacher, and community voice in terms of school climate engagement. We could make that data available to systems because you'd be giving the survey to multiple grades. You would have enough size to actually give feedback in most of our high schools, for example.
What I was trying to get at is not only a capacity problem, but also an answer to the cost question to take across the street, but we're doing a little chicken and egg.
Well, we're doing a little jujitsu until we know what happens with reauthorization, because I think that will depending how that plays out, we'll have a lot more or a lot less flexibility.
Okay, next question. So wasn't licensing supposed to be self-supporting with the new fees that were put in 10 years ago or 15 years ago? That was part of the deal.
Licensing is not self-supporting right now.
Oh, my. Do we have mean scores that we can report to people and just not to cut scores?
In our state-level reporting, we are going to emphasize scale scores, and we are going to de-emphasize reporting categories, but we are required by law to present information on reporting categories.
Okay, suppose we say this many did the pass it, and this is what the feds make us report, but don't pay attention to this. Can we see scale scores that
That's
were
the
available
intent.
at the school level?
Not in every school. If you have a testing group of 9 kids or 3 kids in some schools, you're revealing
The
personally.
vertical scale is not going to give us individual growth either.
No, it won't. You could have growth scores at the SU level, but you could not have growth scores at the school level.
Yeah, I can see it, but it sure shortens up the use of the data.
That's correct. That's the challenge of small schools.
2/3 failed. That's a political decision because we know that that's not been validated. Is there a time and a place that we should, as a board, make a statement on this?
I'd be happy to share some of the letter I wrote to Smarter Balanced about this concern. There were 2 states that voted not to endorse the standard setting process, and those were New Hampshire and Vermont. We abstained from the vote. My choice in abstaining rather than voting against it is it would have brought the whole process down for all the states, and the overwhelming majority of the states wanted to proceed. So we, that's the choice that we made. But what I would do is I'd be happy to share with you the letter that we wrote and encourage the board to speak to it if we
When are they
wish.
projecting the scores will be returned and made public? September?
No, it should be much quicker than that because because it's administrated online. We should have very, very quick results. We are planning to communicate both prior to administration of the test and to again communicate around appropriate and inappropriate inferences as the scores are released to support our districts in having responsible conversations with their public about this.
Okay.
Yeah, and we would encourage you to speak to it as well. And I think part of my fear, what I don't want is a backlash against testing, which erodes the appropriate educational use of these tools, because I worry that we're beginning to hear that. We're also beginning to hear districts that are talking about opting out of the test. If you choose as a district to opt out of the test, then you will not get federal funds. Federal funds that our districts receive are primarily for kids with disabilities and kids who are living in poverty. So if you choose to opt out of the test, you're penalizing the kids who actually need the federal support the most. I'm encouraging our systems to go ahead and take the test, but to help educate our public and our communities around what we can and can't infer based on these tests. I would hate to see kids who are living in poverty punished for the fact that we have federal law which requires us to use them in inappropriate ways.
Stacy?
I believe we had this conversation a year ago, just the importance of getting that communication out, and I'm wondering if we could just revisit quickly what our communal role is in that, or what individual role we could take, because I remember last year that your eloquent letter did go to superintendents and to principals maybe, or just to superintendents, but
Principals as well.
I feel like in some schools, because of individual styles, that message got widely communicated, and other schools, either teachers or parents, did not see that information. And knowing how critical, as you just said, those nuances are, what role might we want to take as a body, making sure that those get to families, school board member, whoever. I don't know if there's some mechanism or it's just all of our personal pledges, but
I mean, I can speak to this because I got the letter because of my role here, but I did not, as a teacher, through that lens, get that letter. And it would have been nice as an educator, and I sent it out to people, but I didn't receive it. So just making sure that we communicate, because once I showed that to other teachers, like, wow, we needed this, and they needed that information. And so how do we make sure that gets communicated? So I think I share the same concerns. Right. And just how do we do that effectively? And what role can we play?
is there something we can do to be supportive of, of the work you've done and the agency's done to get that out there?
I think what might make sense, I think having it come from multiple places makes sense. I think I think our systems need this right now. I am struck as I talk to curriculum coordinators, principals, superintendents, I'm struck by their utter commitment to serve students well and the overwhelming stress they feel about moving to what they perceive as much more challenging standards and the overwhelming rhetoric behind some of the assessment that's going on around those standards. And fear. Feeling a lot of fear. They really fear that they are trying to do the right thing for their children. They feel they're making headway, and they feel that that in addition to supporting testing, they also want to really invest time and energy into some of the work around transferable skills, for example, and they fear that a narrative of testing will erode that work. But and as we move into, this is a real transition for them. And for many very pragmatic reasons, anytime you shift standards, especially at the high school level, kids will not have been exposed to those standards from the beginning. There are going to be gaps in their knowledge that you can't address in the 4 or 5 years that we've been transitioning. So I think it is a reality that this will be a challenging transition. And any messaging that we can do that both emphasizes and provides urgency to our strong commitment to improving learning while managing some of the inappropriate messaging that is going to happen around this, I think is valuable to our system as well. So, if you want, I'd be happy to circulate. If somebody on the board wants to take an initial whack at drafting a response, you could review it at your next meeting. Mm-hmm. And we'd be happy to provide some of the data that we have to support any kind of statement that this board might want to
Would the two of you be willing to take that on?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes. So I will send to you some of the documentation that we have already that supports this.
Great.
Great.
Other questions or comments of Rebecca? Okay. Let's move on to the governor's education agenda. And to remind you,
I think that was supposed to come under my time. Or do you want to wait until the legislative committee report? Do you want?
yeah, it's fine. What I want to do is hear the administration's point of view, and then I want Bill to lead a discussion, and hopefully we can come up with a consensus and maybe strengthen the process up on the Hill and move things along. That's where I'm headed. So why don't we start? Jill, you have a legislative report you want to give us? Is that?
it out last night and have some changes, but it includes some of the major topics that we, as an agency, have been testifying on, things that are related to the state board's agenda, and topics that have just, come up as sort of having a common theme and taking testimony on. And I've also attached, as of yesterday at 6:30 or 7 at night, the bills related to education, so there may be more today, but, and like I said, I'm going to be sending you folks an updated version of this. There's one for each of you. I should have some extras. And I'm sorry I didn't get this to you sooner, but like I said, I didn't want to get it started too soon because I knew it would be different from even Friday. And basically, Rebecca has touched on this a lot already, but one of the things we're really trying to focus on when we do spend time in the State House is really getting legislators to understand the sense of the anxiety and pressure that the field is feeling, and also the capacity of the agency to take on some of this work. I think you could tell from this morning's conversation with House Education that they definitely understand and respect that. We still have some work to do in some of the other committees. A lot of times they will propose committees or commissions. They'll ask for reports or studies, which, while they may not necessarily come with a fiscal note, they certainly do require a great deal of time on the part of the staff of the agency, and we just simply, not only are we not able to do it, but more importantly, certainly we would do if we felt that these things were moving the needle. But more importantly, we really are asking that the legislature work on the systematic and policy from a different perspective, and rather than trying to add pieces each year or divert our attention and resources from the things we're already doing, which we know work well. So the examples of pre-K, Act 77 implementation, EQS, I mean, these are major policy changes that have just happened and are still being implemented and will be, and the effects are still being felt, and we at the agency are mobilizing to support those efforts. So we're really trying hard to get folks in the legislature to understand that there are things that we would like them to focus on, but to really be considerate of really allowing this to be an implementation time for the field and also for the agency. So what I just handed out, like I said, some of these major topics of things that we've spent a great deal of time on testifying. I've collected all of the testimony that agency staff has provided to different committees. Also, I would add that, and I know a lot of you folks already know this, but the legislative webpage has been completely redone, and it's pretty easy to find handouts. You can search by witness, you can search by date. So if you want to find a particular handout on a particular issue or from a particular witness, that's easy to find. You can also, of course, ask me, because anything that's come from the agency, we have a process, and I'm saving all those, which is how I came up with this handy list, because I have folders for each of these topics. I did want to just take this chance to throw out there, just as an example, we had proposed not only increasing the educator licensing fees, but also seeking a fee for ROPA, the results-oriented approval process that we do, where we actually go into the teacher prep programs in the state. And that's something that takes a good deal of time and energy and funds to do, and we've been doing it at no cost to those institutions. So we were seeking a fee on that. The House Education Committee supported us wholeheartedly. Amy Fowler, our deputy, who you folks know, did a really great job of explaining the rationale behind that. One of which is that if we don't do it, then those institutions would have to get accredited through a national system, which is even more expensive by a long shot than what we were asking for. House Education, great, they supported us. It made it to Ways and Means, and it absolutely got completely taken out. So we're hoping to bring that back on the Senate side or again next year, because we're really not at the point we can carry thousands of dollars of work without any help. So that's just an example of one of these little instances that has a pretty big impact on the agency.
So are there no fees for private schools, or is this just for the public universities?
It's
So
both.
any-
It's
okay.
both.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
So as you've discussed, and it sounds like we'll be talking about further, there are two major education bills that are becoming the vehicle for the governor's education proposals, and a lot of the pieces that you folks have asked for also. There's a House Education Committee bill, which has some of those components and other things that committee has asked to put in there. The Senate version of the bill, they had really asked Leg Council to draft, and they worked closely with us to draft out what the governor's education agenda would actually look like in statute. And there's also a really handy handout, which of course having this on paper doesn't help much, but there is a comparison that Donna Russo-Savage from Ledge Council has actually done.
Is this what that looks like?
Yes. And actually, there's actually
All
been,
have this?
Bill
Yes.
sent that one.
Bill sent it.
and I was just adding my notes to it because even since then, there have been some changes to the House Education version so that they're not reflected on that table, but I'm sure she'll do another one. So I know that House Education will basically be spending the week focusing on this. Let's see, so,
Do you know what I probably should have asked them this question this morning, what their time frame is in the House, and, you know, I mean, they're facing a crossover deadline.
yep. I don't know the exact dates. My understanding is because it's a committee bill, they have a little bit more time, and certainly Senate Education is actively hearing from folks already responding to the House version, so they're staying very much on top of what the House version has. So as an example, today they're hearing from the Joint Fiscal Office about some of the pieces in the House Ed proposal. They're hearing about those in Senate Ed. So,
And the House bill will go to 2 other House committees before it hits the floor.
yeah, I suppose it would, as long as it has the pieces that it has in there now, they would, yep, yep.
Just to emphasize, the big difference is this year, there's a lot more coordination between the Senate and the House than there
Yes.
was last year.
Yeah. And the administration. Sorry, Jill.
No, that's okay, and I wasn't sure how far you wanted to dig in, or if you wanted to talk through the major pieces of the agenda, and I can, you know,
Yeah.
pipe in as needed, because certainly, you know, the ideas were put forth, but once it starts to get into legislation, there's a lot of details that we need to respond to make sure that it actually achieves what we're hoping to achieve and doesn't inadvertently have unintended
Right.
consequences. One of the things that was relatively innocuous was making sure that you as a board have the ability to assign an orphan district at their request. So if there is some sort of a formation of some kind of unified district or red, that if there's a district that's been left out and they actually would come to the board, it wouldn't be that the board would just voluntarily, you know, grab them off the board and move them over. They would come to you and ask to be assigned to a certain place. That also, of course, opens up, you know, the conversation that we just want to make sure that it really is driving at supporting schools and districts. There's so many good pieces already in Act 153 and Act 156. And as you know, they're coming to you and are working through those. So we just really want to make sure that we don't, you know, thwart that conversation, and that we do have the ability to make sure that all the districts, even those that don't have, you know, the dance partner, as Rebecca said, end up in a good solution for the school.
Good.
So you want me to run through that?
Yes.
I think, and then Jill can add, you know, the serious detail and all the other, you know, in reality of what's actually happening in that building. But for the record, not this easy organized piece of paper that we have. Allie Richards from the governor's office. Great to be with you all. So yeah, I mean, just a big picture note before I just go through the list, basically of what the governor's agenda is this year. There is a lot to what the chair is saying of coordination between the House and the Senate and AOE, and we feel the board and the administration. And we continue to feel like we are all working really well together, no small part to the Agency of Education and the great leadership they're showing with this sort of triangular relationship. So really, I think there's going to be a lot of roles for all of us to fill. And that's really healthy. So we're very optimistic at this point in the session because of this, but any day it can completely fall apart. So and you know, Jill is doing a great job helping us stay on top of all of it. So the governor laid out his sort of general idea of the challenge that we face and the difficulty of addressing it in his budget address, which I think you all have seen at this point. So just to tease out the very specific proposals from that address quickly, and again, this will be sort of more for emphasis than anything since you've heard them all before. Jill mentioned a couple of them. Secretary Holcomb's been talking about them quite a bit with you all individually. So as you know, his basic concern is affordability, equity, and quality. And they're very interrelated, as you all well know. So here's sort of the list, some legislative things, some non-legislative things from his speech that we've been really putting together as a package. The first is the Agency of Ed's fantastic online tool that hopefully you've been, you know, playing around on, that just is a data clearinghouse for districts. And it's been completely eye-opening for many, and you can look at your scenario. You can look at what happens when phantom students go away, what happens to your tax rates. I mean, you can change these levers. It's an absolutely fantastic tool. So I assume you've been talking it up, but it's really worth seeing and responding to constituents about when people have concerns. We've been steering them now to this tool, and it's been incredibly helpful. So that's no legislation needed. It's already going. The second one, again, is interesting. So a moratorium on legislation that adds cost to districts. So you see Jill's handout. There's already 60 plus bill. I mean, it's unbelievable how many bills have already come up in the education realm. We know this happens every year. The whole point of this was to give districts a respite. We've been hearing from the field loud and clear that we have flexible pathways. We have universal pre-K now. These are fantastic goals. We agree with you on the concepts. We agree with you on getting this done, but it's going to really come down to the implementation and the details. Whether we have a bill or no bill, we'd like to hold ourselves to this moratorium and just being very, very cautious as we watch legislation move through the process of what the implications are for the field on that. The next one is phasing out contradictory and expensive incentives, including the small schools grant and the phantom student provision. They're also taking many different forms in application. Our general sense, I mean, again, the governor, this is why I think it's been a very healthy start to this conversation. He laid out some basic concepts, and then the House and the Senate are getting down to the nitty-gritty on them, and we're doing basically a feedback loop with them as they tweak the idea. So we said, look, general concept is if we are trying to create a system with incentives that move in certain, the field in certain directions, then why do we have the small schools grant? Then why do we have the phantom students? How are these perpetuating issues and stalling really, really tough decisions that shouldn't be stalled? There's in some instances. So again, we're working very closely with the House and the Senate as they add sort of provisions around these, rather than immediately getting rid of the small schools grant. For example, what's been discussed are a few different options. For example, being able to retain your small schools grant if you move forward in some sort of merger, red, mud, maybe for a certain period of time or indefinitely is one of the current House proposals right now. If you do a merger, you can retain it indefinitely to help keep your small school alive in that new thing. So we're working very closely on the details of those, but governor's basic concept is we have to address both of them. They're contradictory at this point. The next is school construction aid. It's in the capital bill. I've been getting very positive reviews from folks. It's just to allow construction aid again, which has been a long time since that's been allowable for incentive purposes. If you're going to go through a merger or some sort of transition, it's a nice incentive to do a facelift to your school, to do some renovations that you've been putting off for a long time, to sort of help with a transition. We've used examples for, schools are coming together. It's, as you know, this is all very cultural, and maybe you just need a quick facelift. Maybe you need to change your school colors. I like the idea of a green and
I was talking to one system that's talking about retooling its media center from a library of the 1950s to a media center of the 2015s, and it's the kind of tool that symbolically makes a powerful statement about a school and makes it more attractive.
And this would be contingent upon some cooperation and change of governance,
Yes.
is that correct?
There's $3 million put aside right now in the capital bill for.
How big is the capital bill these days?
Oh boy, I wouldn't get you an accurate answer. I can
Know
get
how
that
much
to
is
you
in
later.
school construction?
Well, we're asking for $3 million. It's been zero.
That's the total.
For a long
Yeah.
time, right?
Okay.
So I can get you that full answer to give you.
No,
some
that's all
perspective,
right.
But,
I'm just,
so that's in the capital bill. And then we have, as Joel mentioned, enhanced authority for the state board to redistrict in cases where they're orphaned. This has been causing, a lot of people think this is sort of a no-brainer, and it's been getting a bit subsumed in the governance discussions on both sides. But in Senate Ed, I think Chair Cummings said, so this is like a shotgun wedding, she kept describing it as. But really, what we're seeing as, and you all have seen, some districts are trying, they understand that they must do something differently for their students, and they're trying to have some sort of collaboration, and they can't find a dance partner. So take take a map and redraw the lines. It's if someone asks for help and they, and comes to you proactively, you'd have some more authority there.
Part of this addresses some of the equity concerns that you mentioned in the previous session, in that some districts just are struggling and people see them as a liability. They may be very small, but people just know that they'll get their tuition dollars if they do nothing, so they have no interest in sharing governance or voice with them.
So then I'm just going to go straight to the sort of the big chunk here, which is the EQS work. So that we're sort of calling it shorthand the EQRs, the Education Quality Reviews. The governor calls them data partnerships. He's convinced that because no one size fits all, is an option. And really, we're finding such unique, that's why the agency, one of the many reasons why the agency is so stretched thin, because every time they hear a complaint or an anecdote, they have to go specifically to that district or that SU to see exactly what's going on there. This is a way to really get at that and move forward with the EQS. And so you already talked about it, so I won't go into too much detail, but just want to make sure it's on the table. Last year, the legislature put $3.5 million from the Property Tax Relief Fund for the Agency of Ed to, quote, see exactly what we're buying for our Ed Fund dollars. And this, you couldn't get a better tool to do a deep dive and see what we are buying for our Ed Fund dollars. So the idea that, from the governor's perspective, this is a way for the agency to do these deep dives where they're literally going in and doing these peer review, peer expert, these teams go in and get a really 360 view of what is happening in the school, in the SU, and then with the deep dives in the school, as Secretary Holcomb was talking about earlier. And so there's fiscal and quality pieces to this, and this is what's really important to the governor. Again, we can't really diagnose what's happening until you are literally there in the field, and that's when you look at the quality pieces, school climate, test scores. That's just one piece of the puzzle, though. Local accountability and assessments. But then you also are looking at the fiscal, so staff to student ratios. That's where you really get at that piece that everyone keeps talking, where's the staff to student ratio in all this? In these EQRs, that's when you see, well, okay, here's your staff to student ratio. What is happening on the ground that you need a 2.9 to 1 staff to student ratio? Is it English as a second language learners, as special ed, or is it just infrastructure that has not been resized after declining enrollments? So it's a way to really see, is a high staff to student ratio really justifiable or not, and how can we make changes so this is more appropriate, for the sort of sizing based on your student count. So that's where your year-over-year increases in staff, in per pupil spending will be, looked at too. And it's a conversation where with the local group and the community, you're coming up with your own targets and benchmarks. So you can actually sit down with real data. And as the governor says, when Vermonters are given real data, they will make good decisions. So you sit down, real data, and you look at your staff to student ratio, you look at these other factors, and you say, well, what's appropriate for us? What's appropriate for our affordability and our quality and our equity. And then we work together to make sure that happens. And there is one, if there is continuous throughout this process, benchmarks that are mutually agreed upon and then continuously not met, or there's no movement at all to work towards the benchmarks that we have been mutually agreed upon, that's when there are some teeth that the governor would like to add to it. You all have a current authority for some of this. Technical assistance, in extreme cases, administrative.
An administrative takeover. You have the authority to order that right now.
And currently, you have an authority to close the school, which I don't believe has really ever been used. So what the governor would like to add is a sort of mid-level financial penalty before, the closing of the school, which would be having the formula in some way work against you if you continuously make sort of indefensible decisions on the fiscal or quality side. And so an example could be, and what he wants to work on with the legislature, and they are working on it currently, is a potential disallowing of expenditures. We use the tuition example because people ask, so just proactively.
If you operate in tuition simultaneously, that the board, through an administrative takeover, could decide you either operate or you tuition, but you don't do both, for example.
So that's sort of like a step, some teeth. to add as sort of a gradient in the list, the laundry list of potential help or penalties that could be, part of the menu as follow-up for these deep dives that the agency would do. The $3.5 million is definitely envisioned to use part of that to really get this kick-started. We feel like we have to go right ahead with it, and then we can reevaluate in the next few years how it's going, how the funding's going, how much it's costing, how it's working.
So
Just be-
3.5 in addition to the
I wanted to
3?
speak to that. Just be clear, the 3.5 is
Is the
one,
total.
it's also one-time
Yeah.
funding, and some of it has specific responsibilities around fiscal indicators and common chart of accounts that we have
Yes.
to meet. What we're looking at is using the remainder of it to develop some of our systems to support presentation of quality information that would be the basis of a review, but we're targeting that money at one-time expenses, so it might develop protocols and procedures for initial training of site people going on site visits. We are still also looking at creating capacity within the agency to support ongoing reviews.
So I'm not understanding. The 3.5 is in the current fiscal year?
Yes,
It was appropriated last year
And
for the agency.
And what I'm hearing you say is there'll be some of that funding left at the end of this fiscal year?
It may be, but we are being very mindful not to use it for ongoing costs, but only use it for first one-time development costs, because it's not a continuing source of revenue. So it can do,
Can't
it can
hire
support
So you couldn't-
initial design work.
Right.
It could be
And
used to support,
consultation.
right, consultation, bringing an outside expert like Andy Hargreaves to come in and help us think through the development of
Or
the education
increase
quality
board
reviews.
fees or anything like that?
You can put in a request.
If you can relate
Well-
that to what we buy for our ed dollars.
There actually is a bill that I had a little something to do with in government ops, H63, that
Yep.
increases the per diem for state boards and commissions.
It didn't make it on this list, so it doesn't exist.
No.
I'm aware of it.
Last time that was revised was 1984. So, continue.
That's one of those toughies. We don't get ourselves into these messes overnight. So that's actually the full. That's the full list. So I don't know if we want to open it up for questions and discussion. I don't know if Jill wants to tag. I mean, so this is the governor's proposal. It's already taken on a life of its own in the legislature, and then there are many other bills that are an addition or tweaking. Just in a very, very general summary again, how we would characterize it is the Senate started with a committee bill that was written off of this list as their starting point. They will certainly be editing and revising and adding things. I'm sure there already are. The House used this and a series of other proposals that they had created as a committee, and that's the bill that they're starting from. So those
This
are the
may
different-
be, you may disagree with us, but as I look at the two bills, I see the House version taking a stronger stronger position on governance issues. Are there issues that the administration does not favor in the House version as it's currently available?
The governor has been really clear and consistent about not wanting to criticize any ideas right now because it's really easy to criticize these ideas. He wants us to be clear about the challenge and have this conversation during the session of what is doable, what will work, and what is actually passable this session. He is really, there's some principles that he's really sticking to. This session, it must be this session, because we have to take the momentum that we have right now and all the will that has been built, political will that has been built around this issue right now.
And I think we agree with that strongly, in that I heard some talk in January, I'm repeating myself, but you weren't there this morning, in January of dealing with the funding section of this issue this year and the governance next year. And I think we would agree, all in one
And
package.
they're so interrelated. And to
Right.
your point, of course, there is really no mention of governance in a systemic way in the Senate version right now, or, other than the data partnerships, which could move, and the redistricting of orphan districts, which would move you in some direction with the governance. But the House is a much more systemic approach through their SUSD.
Although I
proposal.
did see yours in the Governor's Valley News editorial interview, and it seemed to be, the administration seemed to be taking the position that's more reflected in the House version of the bill.
We're absolutely open to having the conversation about governance if it's something that we can find a workable path forward this session on. Absolutely. And you probably saw in the Valley News article as well, worth mentioning since you asked about the House bill. again, the governor's still in the discussion and give and take with both bodies, but the tuitioning piece, he feels might be a little bit of a lightning rod that might be a bit of a distraction as well, especially with the reciprocity. When we send money out, we have money in. Definitely understand the concept and, why it's being discussed in that committee, but it might be a slight distraction to these other governance and, EQR type of proposals.
Jean Marie.
So I'm curious how you're going to point out to various presenters of bills how to be mindful about the agency's time. So the Senate sent a bill on school discipline reform, which is all about studying suspension and expulsion. And then you have opting out of, there's just so many that require
A commission, I hear the word commission coming up quite a bit.
commission, a report towards reform. What is the strategy of the three of you sitting there representing different areas to talk to both the Senate and the House when these bills come forward to say, this is a great idea. You might think this is just a commission, but we're going to need this many principals, this many, staff, and we don't want to do that this year.
I think another piece of it, just to pick on that one example, we already do
I know.
a research or data collection around that particular issue, and the new proposal repeats the weakness of our initial proposal in that it's all dependent on self-reports.
control.
If you really want to understand discipline in school climate, there is no way to do it except a visit to the site, because which is where the education quality reviews come in terms of looking at school climate. Because if the one that just keeps coming up, if a district has a high number of hazing and harassment reports, for example, it could be that they have an out-of-control problem with hazing and harassment on site. It also could be that they have a very proactive administration, which takes concerns very seriously and is very proactive about soliciting and reporting and following up. So we don't know. We don't even know how to interpret those numbers unless they are validated, so to speak, by a visit to the school site. So part of what we've been trying to do is push back and help people understand the limitations of the current tools, the reason for those limitations, and also help them understand that every single task force, every commission, every report, every additional data, because we have no additional funding, is supported by taking away capacity from some other critical priority that's already on the table that somebody else already feels is critically important. And what it does is it erodes our ability to actually serve any of those goals well. So we're just going to keep pushing that message back.
I want to add, too, I can give you a specific example about that one. So we're drafting a written response to S67, and Karen Edwards will be going to testify. But sort of organizationally, we could not do this or communicate that without the VPA, the VSA, the VSBA, we all are in constant communication about a lot of these bills, and there are oftentimes, there's one S9 that is also a huge concern for DCF. So between other agencies and then the partners, we are all kind of constantly communicating about these things and giving each other a heads up. I can't take a lot of credit for noticing these things. A lot of time it's brought to my attention by other people who are also impacted.
And to be truthful, honestly, some of our partners in the field are able to put together cogent, precise, concise testimony on some of these issues in a way much faster than we could. And we're really indebted to them for that.
And
I want to get this conversation back to, the main agenda, and I want to get Bill involved here, and so we can maybe come up with a statement. Ally, from your point of view, what can this board do to assist this process? It seems to me that it's finally ripened and things are happening. It's not clear yet, but it seems that we are going in a direction, and so.
Well, I think it's already helpful how you all have worked over the past year and a half, 2 years, to get us in this direction. Because, again, if you look through the governor's agenda...
But we don't take credit for it. We know better than that.
If you look at the governor's agenda and the legislative agenda, there are a lot of roles and responsibilities that come to this board, because this is the right place to house that. And it's all sort of the way to grease the governance discussion and some of these, changes in the field. So I think that the board has and is going to play a really important role when we're looking at, structural changes. who's the body that makes this decision or has this authority to move forward. So we need to stay in really close discussions with you as these move forward and as responsibilities become assigned to specific bodies, and your board's name comes up quite a bit in that regard. So I think you're going to have a huge role to play. I think you continue to be in very close communication with both committees and monitor it with us in the agency. And I don't know, do you have some specific takeaways? I mean, I think that your discussion of, from your bird's eye view, looking down at the field, and some of these high leverage points continue to be really helpful.
I think one of the challenges is help. I don't know how to say this concisely, but two of the powers of this board is, first of all, you represent diverse stakeholders and perspectives in the system, and you also are a longer enduring deliberative body. So you tend to take a broader view. And one of the things that worries me when I see this is what we're not focusing on is our system as a system and the coherence of all these initiatives as they come together. And that is a unique role that this body plays in this whole deliberative conversation, is helping us attend to the health of the system and how all these pieces come together in the health of our education system.
Okay.
And so any verbalizing that this group can do in that context, I think, is incredibly powerful.
I'd like to suggest that we take a 5-minute break, and then when we come back, Bill and Ally, I hope you can stay.
Sure.
Lead us through the conversation of what kind of statement we're going to make to the legislature on these issues.
Before we take a break, Jill, I've got 211 as being the latest version of this. Is there something new?
211?
That's what you have too.
The date.
Oh, yep. Which was,
Last week's.
1.3,
What's the other week?
1.2 House.
That would
So-
be Wednesday last week.
okay, so as of Thursday or Friday, there's a new version of the House
Thursday.
Ed bill. It added a couple of studies asked of the agency. But I will, in fairness
think
and
we were
in,
just
and in,
talking
in
about
appreciation to Chairman Sharp, he said they were simply placeholders so that they could continue to address that. So they're not at all set in stone, but they were related to collective bargaining. We had asked for, from both committees, some new language about principal and superintendent roles and responsibilities. Again, the devil
I'm
in
asking is, can you print out a later version, or are we safe working with this version, and
For
can we
today.
get copies
Sounds
made?
like we're safe working with this, because this has got the big
It's got
issues.
the concepts.
Yeah.
Right.
And we
Right.
don't want to get mired down into,
No, we don't. I guess if we can get some copies of this for people who don't have it, we can all work off
Okay.
this one.
all right? We will reconvene at 11:35.
We can ask them.
Dale and Jeff Francis want to give us their thoughts on the legislation quickly, so let's hear their comments first, and then we'll move back to Bill.
Are we?
Why don't you wait a minute until people assemble? We're on time, because that cigarette didn't take so long outside this time.
I think you have to give people their 5 minutes. You said 5 minutes.
Let it be on the record who is here.
On time.
Proceed from hearing from the gentleman from the School Board Association, the Superintendent's Association.
Thank you, Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for accommodating us. I have an obligation over at the State House at noon, and I didn't want to miss the
Chance to talk.
the moment in this group when you're going to be discussing such an important issue. And so I'll share a few thoughts, and Jeff may well be here longer, and he never hesitates to share his thoughts as well. So we'll.
And for the record, the board is well aware of that last statement.
I would say that what we're going to share with you is information that we have spent a lot of time on working together. As I've said to the legislative committees, if the superintendents and the school boards, who are ultimately responsible to make sure that there's a great product for a reasonable cost in every one of our communities, can't agree on a direction forward, it doesn't bode well for the many, many diverse constituencies that are out there that have opinions about this subject. So we've spent a lot of time coming together on the general direction that we would share with you. I think what makes this particular time different than perhaps where we've been at other times in the last decade is that there is broad agreement on what needs to be accomplished. And you've said it here countless times in terms of making sure that there's high-quality opportunities available for all students in Vermont, that equity is a huge issue, and that we need to be flattening the trajectory of the per-student cost line. I mean, that's the way I'll articulate it. There are people who say, well, where's the money, and let's save millions tomorrow. But at a minimum, what needs to happen is a flattening of that trajectory, which has been troubling to many, not the least of whom are property taxpayers. And we are optimistic that this is a year when we may be able to find a pathway forward that will be acceptable to a lot of folks, including many of our members. When we put together our ideas, there were 6 principles that I'm going to fly through because we don't really have the time to go through through them in all detail, but I'll mention them before I talk about the few specific or give you an overview of how our ideas might be a little different than what you've seen so far in the draft legislation. The 6 principles were that the first one is we have to be focused on outcomes. This should be a time when my wife is always saying when I come back from endless meetings, she says, there's the old saying of when all is said and done, far more is said than is done, and we're good at that as a state. And this is a time when we need to make sure that we're actually addressing the issues on the table. We need to be focused on outcomes. We have greatly appreciated the Secretary's focus on measuring outcomes, providing data to boards and citizens, and allowing, and frankly, if outcomes are really poor or costs are really high, allowing for intervention where those indicators are problematic. So the whole endeavor ought to be focused on what we're going to try to accomplish. The second is we need to allow for districts to have more flexibility in the deployment of resources. We did those meetings in the fall, which I think you've heard about, with Secretary Holcomb meeting with about 600 folks locally. 2 big themes came up from people who said, yes, we agree there are these we agree that the problems that have been identified are very real, and there's 2 things that we need. One is the ability to flexibly deploy or to manage staff resources on units that are bigger than what we have. And the second, very closely associated, is achieving some kind of scale in our entire operation. And so there are a variety of ways to do that, but we need to come up with a way to achieve those objectives. Otherwise, the scenario that's been described to you so well continues, where people are looking at each other saying, how do we continue to scale back a program that's already on the margins as a way of getting a budget through? Thirdly, solutions should not assume one size fits all. You've heard that statement again and again and again. It needs to be taken very seriously, because the fact is solutions defy simplicity in Vermont unless people were willing to sort of assume the entire system goes away and it gets rebuilt, which is not easy either. But today we have 4 people from 4 different school districts coming into the Senate Ed Committee, which is where I'm going, to share the complexity of the system so that people can really understand. So when we say things like, as is in the House version, on a particular date, all supervisory units become supervisory districts, that could work legally in about 14 out of our 45 supervisory unions. In the other 30 or so, there are choice complexities which would make it legally would make them legally unable to simply say we're going to have one board with one district, unless people are willing to compromise around the choice options, which they may be. But my point is, one size can't fit all is a principle that needs to guide what we're proposing, which I will explain to you in a second. Fourthly, solutions must allow local communities to design and implement their own structural change, and I think everybody has been strongly supportive of that over time. Structural changes should be encouraged through a mix of incentives and disincentives. We really like the construction incentives. Hopefully they can be as robust as they can possibly be, because we have a long history in this state. If you look at many of the great union schools that had been created. It was built around all the union high schools back in the 60s. The Waterbury Duxbury School that was created. In all those instances, many of those instances, there were substantial financial resources made available, and it helps people get over some of the difficulties of this cultural merging when you can have a tangible result like that. So we strongly encourage that. The other incentives that have been available, and obviously some of the issues that Ally Richards shared this morning in terms of not forever incentivizing situations where especially on the ADM hold harmless, where you have some districts that have this structural buffer built in that has caused people to not make some decisions that they should probably make. So we're in support of a lot of those things, not every one as they've been defined, but the direction. And fourthly, solutions should be crafted. Lastly, solutions should be crafted to retain strong community connections. There are all kinds of proposals out there that you've all heard, which are about going to, in essence, county government or some kind of very large region, 16, 17, 14. We are strongly opposed to going to places like that because it puts responsibility for education way far away from the average citizen or the average community, and we don't think that's compatible with where Vermonters are and where they would be. However, there is a place to become somewhat larger than where we are. So we need to make sure that we find that sweet spot, and we think the direction of the legislation so far
Let me ask you
is in the right category. Yes.
Let me ask you about, not to drag this out, but it strikes me that we're looking at trying to solve an educational issue.
That's correct.
And the reason that we've struggled with this in the past, and this is more political than anything, is that there's been more emphasis on the community versus the education or the educational opportunity. So I'm not quite sure what you mean by, I didn't get your exact words, but when you put community into it, that sends a signal to me that, that's just repeating what we've gone through for the last 50 years, and we all got stories we can tell.
Well, the problem with all these discussions is that half the time when we use terms, we can read them any number of ways. Vermont, I've shown you this before, but in terms of where we are as a state, in terms of our oversight of education, we are off this edge as far as you can get in terms of, the numbers of boards and numbers of people, the very closeness of our education oversight, and there's extremes way over here. There are people who would say we ought to go way over here or we ought to go somewhere in the middle. The proposal that the House, all the discussion in the House and the Senate thus far have been coming back from the edge, back in here a little bit. So you're still close to our communities, but where you've got more scale and you've got the ability to deploy resources efficiently. So all I was saying is those proposals that would put us with some kind of county government are probably not going to be attractive, probably wouldn't fly, and those aren't being proposed. I just wanted to, but it was part of the principle of what's guided us. Okay, and then to go to some of the, I'm going to describe this not in detail. We've got a sheet that shows in detail what it might include, but our proposal had been that the goal here is to solve the problems that have already been defined, and that we would do that by creating somewhat larger entities, which would probably look more like what in terms of size and scope, look more like the territory of current SUs, which are responsible for the education of all children in that larger region, and these would be known in essence as integrated pre-K to 12 systems. So in other words, the solution that's proposed is that every community is part of a pre-K to 12 integrated system. Now the question, of course, is what is that, and it's or what does it look like specifically? We would expect that the outcomes and the clear description of what that is would be established by the agency and the state board. That's in essence what our proposal is. Now the committees may have enough time to further define what that might look like, but our proposal includes the expectation that that would be part of a rulemaking process that you would all be involved in.
That's an important distinction. That's an important distinction.
Say more.
would you be saying by that we would determine by rulemaking process what kind of configuration would be acceptable for
It's not,
the House version?
well, just to
What could be adopted?
finish the whole sequence, because it's not about configuration, it's about what does it mean to have an integrated pre-K to 12 system?
Okay,
That
I'll
that
wait.
definition and the criteria for an acceptable pre-K to 12 system would be what would be decided through, which would be further clarified through rulemaking, depending on how far they get across the street. The third.
Would you think it's, I'm sorry to interrupt, would you think it's preferable for them, I mean, as I said this morning, as much definition and jurisdiction that they can set forth in law,
Yes.
I think helps the process, as opposed to a nine-member appointed board to come up with all the rules and regulations.
I would agree with that, and I'm giving you the very short version, given the time we have here,
Okay,
but.
I'm sorry, and we'll stop interrupting.
No, but in all seriousness, I mean, it's a very legitimate point you're making, so the more clarity that could be put into the statute over here, the better. But at the end of the day, there will still be some work to be done to bring clarity, because I just don't know as it's possible in this
Of
kind of
course,
process to
yeah.
get down to the granular level. The third big principle is that a pre-K to 12 system could be seen either by overseen by a single board in a supervisory district, or could be designed to be overseen by a multi-board structure. There are a lot of people who don't like to hear that, but that is reality in Vermont, unless you're willing to take on the choice issue. Since you got 30 supervisory unions that currently have these blends, either it's going to be a multi-board structure, or you got to come to grips with choice. Our feeling is, at this moment in time.
I'm sorry, I'm a little
Yep.
limited. I can't figure out how you're thinking this is going to work. So you're talking about two boards, one just to deal with the choice students
No.
and one to deal with all
No.
the operating levels in the system? What is your vision for a multi-board
The
system?
vision, the vision is that the grouping of districts, whatever that is, needs to be able to articulate how they're going to provide an integrated pre-K to 12 education system within the context of multiple boards. So they will have to define what's the supervisory union going to do, if we're still going to call them supervisory unions. What are local boards going to do? Will there be some joint contract schools? Will there be some REDs? Will there be some joint agreements? Will there be more people hired through the supervisory union level? In
I'm
other
sorry,
words,
Steve, how is that different from what we do currently?
Yeah.
there is no expectation, there is no requirement on the part of the supervisory union currently to do any of that. Supervisory union is a loose collection of
But the Act
entities.
153 moves responsibility for curriculum to the SU level, which implies that we do expect SUs to be the seat of decisions around curriculum and instruction already. So it seems like that's already in statute. I'm trying to understand how what you're talking about is different from what we currently do.
Well, having spent a lot of time in supervisory unions, there are many supervisory unions in the state where people don't envision where the board members do not feel a common obligation to all the students in the supervisory union. I mean, it's just true.
So how's that going to fix this?
Yeah.
How is it going to fix it?
How's your proposal going to make what's existing and what you're saying any better?
Because they would need, I mean, their task would be to create a system out of their resources that they can articulate to you all in terms of how all the students in that region are going to get equitable education. So I'm going to use the example of the districts that you've spent the last 5, 3, 4, 2 years, however many years it's been.
Forever.
That entity has an obligation. I mean, first of all, that group will not become a RED. They can't become a RED because they've got 4 K-12 districts, 3 choice towns, 2 non-operatings, and 1 that has a relationship with a private academy. Unless you all know something that I don't know, that group's not going to become a RED. Their task is to create a pre-K-12 education system within that entity. And there's all kinds of ways they could do that if that's their task. The 4 towns that operate high schools could come together and operate a joint contract. They could become a RED within that SU. They could do something different with middle school and high school. They could do staff sharing arrangements. They could do all kinds of things, but that's their task. If there is not any, if there's no expectation that they're going to do that, they could end up being one huge SU with 10 districts that are all doing their own thing. I mean, there is no expectation in statute, despite the good work that this board did and that they've done to date. So,
Steve, can you
yeah.
clarify for me, what do you think are the specific roles and responsibilities of school boards with respect to students who are in a choice model?
They are responsible to make sure that, I mean, the school board is responsible to make sure that they have made a plan for the quality delivery of education for all their students. And if they choose a choice option for their students, then obviously they are giving up a substantial amount of control in that particular town to what those kids, what happen with those kids.
What are the roles beyond sort of the business manager responsibilities associated with paying for tuition?
Their job is to make sure that it's still working for both their students and their taxpayers on an ongoing basis. So if all their money starts getting dragged off into tuition payments and it's weakening their elementary school, they have an obligation to do something about that. You can't just leave it like that. If the neighboring high school starts looking really good because it's getting stronger, they have an obligation to say, do we keep doing what we're doing, or do we start designating that school, or do we become a partner with them in the operation of that school? I mean, they have an ongoing obligation for those students and for the education and for their taxpayers. I really don't like the idea of just because you made a choice once upon a time to tuition your students, that somehow there's no more obligation, or it somehow goes to somebody in the state level. Those students are, frankly, when you look at that district that you've spent all this time on, there are a number of those students in those choice towns that go to those public high schools. If they don't see themselves as all part of that pre-K to 12 education system, that would be a serious loss. They ought to feel a connection to the well-being of those students.
Thank you.
My point on this is this isn't the design of some perfect system. This is what we're putting out there is it's a proposal that has potential to actually be adopted and to be real and to make a difference. And so I'll just go into the last two items. One of the other concerns we have about the current House bill is that it basically gives the option of maintaining current governance structure. Our belief is that all districts should have to do this, be able to articulate an integrated pre-K to 12 system and move there within a certain time frame. Maintaining the status quo really should not be an acceptable option. And then last but not least, the assessment system that you've talked about becomes an underpinning of the whole thing, because if at the end of the day people don't take action, if at the end of the day we've got these tremendous disparities or very low performance, there needs to be the ability for intervention to occur through the agency or the state board. So those are the sort of the high points that we've got a lot more detail that we've put forward. But anyway, those are our thoughts about what could actually be successful this year.
Jeff, would you like to add to that?
First of all, I thought that the questions that were asked of Steve are instructive in terms of the complexities of navigating from the current state to the future state, because for every question you raised, there are 10 or 12 behind it. And I'm going to talk at the sort of the highest level. First of all, based on the earlier comments I made about the need for action and what we heard from Allie Richards with regard to the governor's instruction, I guess, that we act this year on something that will be implementable and accomplish something. My view is, and it's reflected, I think, in the proposal that Steve articulated, is not only do we need to enable economies of scale but we need to deliver communities at scale. And one of the challenges we have right now is that we have communities that are not operating at scale. And a lot of the more dire information that you see, the more stark data, goes to communities that identify themselves along geographical boundaries that have become so small as to not be viable. And people can challenge that if they want to, but we can provide case after case after case of places that are deliberating not what's additive with regard to their educational process, but what they're taking away and watching their costs rise as they take things away. So economies of scale and communities at scale. The second point that I would say, and I think it's reflected in the description that Steve provided, albeit in a manner that I think that you pushed back a little bit on and said, will this really accomplish anything? His point, or our point, about one size not fitting all is absolutely true, but I would say everybody needs to be fitted, right? So the places that are existing in isolation or would like to persist in isolation really are just avoiding the clock at this point. But with but a few exceptions, the demographics in the state and the cost implications in the state are going to, over time, affect everybody. And it's important that we realize that. And when I say affect everybody, evidence to that is that we are now operating in the Act 60 era in an education funding system, which is a statewide education funding system. So even though we purport to have, and I happen to think we do, have the potential for equity in our funding arrangements, we now know that the manifestation is that we don't have equity in our educational opportunity. So what I have started to say, and it sounds a little bit hokey, but I think it's absolutely on point, is that in the matter of public education, in the context of aggregated monetary resources, all of Vermont is our community. We are no longer a community of 251 individual towns, nor are we a community of 300 individual school districts. We're a community that has to exist together. So when we say pre-K to 12 integrated systems, we mean just that. Communities of interest that have responsibility pre-K to 12. The challenge to accomplish the change that we need to accomplish really is imperiled by a couple of attitudes, at least. One is perceived threat to small school, because small schools are identified as the crux of individual communities. And if you don't think in the context of all Vermont being our community, then it's very easy to become isolationist with regard to my small school and my small community. But the days of using a small school as a surrogate for community are long gone. And they're especially long gone in the minds and attitudes of the youngest people in this state. The second sort of construct that imperils us is this threat to historic school choice. And that's why when Rebecca asks a question, how do you contend with school choice? If we're not careful, the perceptions of loss of school choice, if not managed honestly and well, can be a threat to our progress forward. A lot of our impediments to changing the governance structures in the state have been people saying, I can't lose my school choice. So when Steve talks about integrated pre-K to 12 systems and the potential for not a single governing body, but a multitude potentially of governing bodies, really that's reflective of the fact that we've got districts that have school choice and they don't want to give it up. If you look back to 883 and to 156, the way that was contended was to let these entities go to scale, even in the construct of retaining choice and operating. And one of the things that we need to think about is how we navigate to a point where we don't challenge the notion of historic school choice, because I think that is an Achilles heel for moving forward. But how do you enable communities at scale and economies of scale and manage that as well as you possibly can without forcing cultural change, frankly, that will stop the progress that we need to make dead in its tracks. And I think that what we've tried to accomplish is reflective of that challenge. I don't think it's perfect, but I think if we can't address this issue of not challenging small schools, actually making them more viable, not less viable, through larger economies of scale and communities at scale, and providing opportunities for historic school choice in places that have had it and want to retain it in a different sort of construct, then what we're doing is infinitely more challenging. I mean, that's what challenges us. So those are the thoughts that I would leave you with. And if you can tolerate, I can tolerate questions if you have them. I don't know if you can tolerate having us up here any longer.
Steve needs to go.
Yeah, that's all right. I got a couple minutes if you got questions.
Yes, go ahead, Chris.
Talking about just multiple boards, and you're really the expert on this, can you really talk about what's the sustainability of actually the amount of boards that we're requiring, and are there enough people to fill that volunteer positions? And can you just talk about, I feel like a healthy system is when you don't have people just running unopposed for every single office, and how much of the state do we see a healthy system, and looking at that from the multiple boards that you're talking about under your system, and can we sustain that engagement?
I would strongly suggest that the discussion not be about boards. I mean, I understand that's part of that sort
Well,
of.
just to clarify what you were saying earlier about.
I'm just responding to your question. The focus should not be on how many boards, whether they're opposed, whether any of that stuff. The question is, there's some objectives that have to be achieved in terms of cost, quality, equity. All Vermonters have to be engaged. I mean, what we're proposing is that all Vermonters have to be engaged in solving these problems and creating systems that are at scale and that can deliver the equity, and we ought to be focused on the outcomes. To the degree that people can achieve the outcomes by designing something, and they'll be coming to you. I mean, if our plan gets bought, they'll be coming here to have the discussion about how it's going to work. How is it that, if you look at the preamble of the version 2.1, which you may not have seen yet, but from the House, there are 9 objectives, one of which is conditions for leadership. People are going to have to come here and describe how it's going to work. How are they going to meet? Where are they going to meet? How are they going to make it? How are they going to operate in an integrated fashion? How are they going to share staff? How are they going to get economies of scale? I mean, it will push people to the edge. But I honestly don't see an alternative pathway other than punting, which would be something like nobody has to change their. I mean, what we did last year in 883. It all sounded good, but it did say if you got choice, you don't have to change it, and if you don't have choice, nobody can force you to have it.
So,
which in essence was a showstopper later in the process. So we're putting it out there up front, saying let's focus on the results, not on the structural.
What I'm hearing you
aspects.
say,
Yeah.
and I'm learning something, I think, the second draft of the House bill
Yes.
doesn't require everybody to go into a supervisory district.
It does. It does require it. However, the preamble is new, and the preamble lays out 9 objectives, which we are in full agreement with. It's just that when you get deeper in the bill, it starts getting difficult. Number 1, it says every SU has to become an SD, and then it says, or you can maintain your current governance structure, or you can create an alternative, and it starts getting quite.
And that's all that authority is given to the SPE to allow that to happen.
Much you should read it. You're heavily involved in a lot of it. Yes, yes. We have suggested to the committee that they embrace more of our ideas in the next version, and they've been open to further discussion about it. That's why I just wanted to make sure it was on your radar when you get into this discussion this
The
afternoon.
House bill is still, the local community rolls their own and sends it to us for approval.
That's correct.
So this is
Okay.
sort of like the waiver processes under 153. If you don't want to go with 153, you're free to petition the Secretary of Education for a waiver.
This is not that. I mean, we could debate it. What it is everybody has to be able to create a pre-K to 12 integrated education system that they can describe and convince you all that there's reality to it. There's nothing about it that is, we're not going, we're not interested, leave us alone. None of that. It's all about how do you create, even within a complex structure, an integrated system, and how do you articulate it. And I've seen enough boards that are interested in this stuff, but you're right. Our current structure is such that it's really hard. It is not because people aren't well-intended, but it's easy to fall back into the structure that we have unless there's an overriding expectation that in fact they will be operated differently.
You know, the thing I'd say is the challenge is, and I agree with Steve, we're seeing more and more interest. I mean, it's amazing. We're getting, like the AOE, almost a call a day from a supervisory union or school district that I think does see the writing on the wall. The question is, the point is, we don't have a great record of converting interest to accomplishment in this state. And what are we going to do? What are the policy levers that will be applied in order to convert interest to accomplishment? Because as I said inartfully at the beginning of this meeting, there's a heck of a lot of conversation that goes on that really doesn't amount to anything. And we can't afford that in this state any longer. And we certainly can't afford it for the taxpayers, but we most especially can't afford it for the kids.
Well, that's why.
And this notion that we could, persist and have conversations about this for 3 or 4 or 5 years leaves me happy that my children have already graduated from the public education system in Vermont, to be frank.
And that's, to oversimplify, that's why I keep saying to the legislature, set the guidelines, give the time frame, give us the discretion to address local issues, if you will. But if you can't just say this is our target and hope it's going to happen, because we know from experience that ain't going to work. I mean, it's got to be a mandate that's people have got to go through this process to look at the governance issues.
That's right. And I think that, one of the intricacies of the plan that Steve's articulated that we worked on is it's a prove it strategy. I mean, you have to be able to say, well, if I can't be a SD for reasons that go to the complexities of our current operational structure, what we are going to do is this. And by doing this, we will achieve these things. What makes that challenging is the state, and you alluded to this earlier, has to be prepared to make that something other than a subjective judgment. Mm-hmm. And, what I've seen, the reason that I have some hope for this type of approach, because I think it does address the small schools' viability and the choice issues at some level, is that I've seen better measurements coming out of the Agency of Education since Rebecca Holcomb arrived there than I had in the decade before. The challenge that we run into, and this really is a big problem for me intellectually, is that I think that in too many instances, because of the way we govern, and I mean the collective we govern, oftentimes we find ourselves in a situation where we wouldn't invest a dime even if it would save $1. So I am pained by the conversations about, well, we're looking to the Agency of Education and State Board to play this very important role, but we worry every minute of every day about whether they're well enough resourced. So I think before we get through this deliberation, that question's going to have to be called, because if we pass a piece of legislation, any piece of legislation that has a role for the Agency of Education and the State Board, the last thing I want to do is have to sort of, not be outspoken about the fact that those entities need the actual resources to be able to accomplish it. And I've seen that happen before.
Just for context, to support that, the number of waiver requests we get associated with Act 153, not all of which are well thought out,
Right.
would be indicative of the challenge.
Right. So thank you for being open to this. It's a deliberative process.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
My suggestion at the front end was for you guys to be actively involved. I think you're demonstrating that you're going to be and you need to be.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Well, Cindy's getting ready. I'm really pleased to welcome Cindy today to to speak to us about special education, and I suggested that the board spend some time learning from Cindy, first of all, about special education and some of the current work at the agency, particularly around some of our current initiatives, and also to meet with, in subsequent meetings, some of the experts from UVM who are doing work around multi-tiered systems of support and education, special education funding. We feel this is an incredibly important work. We feel like we have some terrific work that Cindy will speak to in the agency that's currently underway statewide that's showing some very promising results. But we also are concerned by some evidence we're starting to see that we may need to do better in terms of reaching kids inclusively and ensuring that all kids, and particularly kids with disabilities, are well supported and receiving high-quality instruction from qualified teachers. So I think this is the beginning of a series of conversations we hope the board will entertain, and we assume that at some point, perhaps next year, you'll be able to build on this foundation to come up with some really powerful policy recommendations that will benefit our children.
Great.
So, thank you, Cindy.
Cindy, welcome, and please proceed.
Okay, thank you. I have like 16 different directions I could go for sure. Lots to talk about. So I just want to say thank you for meeting with me today. It's nice to get to know you and have you see my face and know who I am. Relatively new in this position. I came from a background of being a speech-language pathologist for 20 years in the school districts and then had a private practice. I managed the developmental reading assessment for the state in 2000 and coordinated that. That's a second grade assessment, a statewide assessment. And then from there I moved on to being the alternate assessment coordinator at the AOE. So my background truly is with students with significant cognitive disabilities. I've done that for the last 12 years and have really pushed that forward. There's a lot of really great things that are happening for those students. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of the background because that's really where I come from and my passion, I guess you could say. With that being said, my role then at the AOE when I was asked to be the special ed director was really to become more of a face at the agencies, working with the field, working with teachers, and I support special ed directors and parents, but specifically come from that background of working with students with really severe cognitive disabilities. And another thing I'm trying to do at the AOE is bring teams together through coordinating different agencies that are both inside and outside the AOE. In my work with alternate assessment, I know a lot of the special ed teachers and directors across the state. So as far as my role, I think most importantly, I want to make sure that all students with disabilities are not forgotten and that they're seen as not an exception, but as someone who belongs to a system. So in that role, I see myself linking agencies and people and resources across the state so that we're not forgetting about those kids that have those learning challenges and how to fit them into all the really great, wonderful initiatives and happenings that are going on in the state. So from there, I've spent some time with the strategic plan and like how that all fits together. I guess the vision from the AOE is, and again, coming from where I am, you're going to hear this over and over from me because everybody at the AOE knows this about me, but all means all. And when we say all means all, we mean all means all, not just all except those kids who can't talk, or all except those kids with behavioral disorders. We mean all, and that's really important to me. And by that, I mean students are not just accessing grade level general ed curriculum. They're participating in the curriculum in really meaningful and purposeful ways, and they're making progress in that general ed curriculum. And so we have a work group at the AOE that's bringing together a lot of different teams, the integrated support for learning team, the monitoring team, the school effectiveness team, and we have a vision that all teachers and schools are supported in their responsibility to provide an equitable, inclusive, high quality, and cost responsive opportunity education for all students. So that matches up pretty well with the strategic plan. I actually pulled out some words that I thought were great. Completing education. Of course, we want all our kids to graduate. And in Vermont, students have till they're 22 to meet those graduation requirements. Be successful and gain all the knowledge and skills that they can in the educational institution. Flexible learning environments. I'm really excited about the personalized learning plans right now. It's a general ed initiative, and so we're looking at general educators taking responsibility for those kids who have those learning challenges, because while special educators are really good at modifying curriculum, we know that the content teachers are the ones who know the content. So for those students to have access to that and be engaged in flexible ways is really huge for special education in the state of Vermont, and that these kids are given, again, I'm going to go back to the opportunities. It's all about opportunities for these kids, and they should be equitable in terms of all kids having the same opportunities and learning environments. Self-development, really big on that. I'll talk to you a little bit about our SIP in a minute, but one of the things we're finding is that some of our students with emotional disabilities and other students are leaving school without this self-advocacy skills. So that's something that we want to really focus on as well. Have kids, as you know, before they leave, are really good self-advocates for themselves, because that's really important. We do a lot of work. We work really, really hard to support these kids in schools, but we really have to also teach them how to generalize that once they leave school and be their own advocates, so that they can support themselves once they leave school. Academic achievement, I'm all over that. I think that all kids can learn. In fact, I brought an article for all of you I want to share in a little bit, but I think all kids can be engaged and learn in academic achievement at a level where they can access, and I'm going to show you a little bit about that. Engagement, again, really, really huge. We know that all kids have to be challenged and want to have things they want to learn, and be supported in those different ways of learning. We know that there's lots of multiple intelligences and different ways that students can learn. So really hoping that we can work on that engagement piece. And again, I think the personalized learning is definitely going to help, especially kids with disabilities. And high expectations. That, again, in this article I'm going to show you, it's all about high expectations, and we're only limited by what we think students can do. So always pushing that out. So with that being said, I'm going to share these with you. This is, I probably have handed this out 10,000 times. This is an article written by Cheryl Jorgensen, who is a special educator at UNH, University of New Hampshire. She's actually going to be helping me next year, hopefully, to help us integrate students in the classroom. Least dangerous assumption. You may or may not be familiar with that, but in 1984, Ann Donnellan, who is a well-known special education researcher, wrote about least dangerous assumption, and I like to hold that true for all kids, and especially kids with significant disabilities. And it's right in that bottom corner there on the front side. I actually highlighted it. There's a lot of really good things in here. If you get a chance, read this. She says the criterion of least dangerous assumption holds that in the absence of conclusive data. In other words, we're testing kids all the time. We know that the intellectual assessments, they're challenging those. They're a little controversial. We're not always sure exactly what a student's intelligence level is. Specifically, if they can't communicate and they don't have movement, we're not really sure. We don't have really good tests to measure intelligence. So with the absence of conclusive data, educational decisions ought to be based on assumptions which, if incorrect, will have the least dangerous effect on the likelihood that students will be able to function independently as adults. And this other really important one is that we should assume that poor performance is due to instructional inadequacy rather than to student deficits. And as a teacher, that was always my motto, was if a student wasn't learning, it wasn't the student's fault, it would be that would be something that I had to work on to figure out a different way to instruct that student. So teacher quality is really important too, knowing that teachers have the mindset that students are competent, we do have high expectations for those students, and that it's my responsibility to help that student, whether it's provide them a communication system, teaching them to read or add, or however that may work. Anyway, this is a really good article. Again, it has changed several people that I've come across who were very leery about students with significant disabilities and what they can or can't learn. So I just wanted to share that with you. With that, I have 3 buckets of that I want to, in the limited time that I have, and I, again, as Rebecca said, I'm more than happy to come back and talk specifically about some of these things. Today was more or less an overview, a gloss of what it is I do and how I see things. And actually, I met with a lot of special educators at the AOE before I came here to get their vision and make sure I'm representing the AOE and how we're seeing things in the state of Vermont. So the first big bucket is closing the achievement gap or improving outcomes for students. And looking at the data. There's lots of data. We're finding other data, and we're going to be using the data really closely and significantly to do some root cause analysis and find out where are the problems and how can we fix those. And I know that that's in your plan as well. Funding, huge one. As we know, I'm hopefully on top of that. I'm talking with lots of stakeholders across the state. Unfortunately, Michael Giangreco and Tammy Colby, we're hoping to have them come. They weren't able to make it today, but I think we have them lined up for the next meeting. So they'll get to talk to you a little bit about different funding ideas, and they'll be on my group of stakeholders as we move forward with looking at the funding system. Right now, with the whole multi-tiered systems of support in the state of Vermont and how we're moving forward with that, we're finding, as you know, the funding is not philosophically matched to that. We really, really want to look at our system that we have now and change the funding so that it's not creating the barriers that we see for kids with learning disabilities right now. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I've been over witnessing some testimonies at the legislature, so obviously they're very interested in that, and I'm sure all of you are as well. So that's a project that I'll be working on. There's all kinds of things. I talked a little bit about MTSS and SWIFT. I don't know how much of that you all know. PBIS, which is the Positive Behavioral Interventions. That's big in our state. PLPs, Personalized Learning Plans. The BEST Institute is something that I'm really involved in, and we'll have a strand there this summer and that's all MTSS, working through that, and our kids with intensive needs will be covered in that as well.
You will understand what MTSS is. What that means. Maybe can you just explain?
Because you've turned your mic away from yourself.
Could you just give us a
Sure.
quick explanation of what MTS is, what the logic is behind it, and
Absolutely.
how it might look or play out in a system? And SWIFT is an example of a MTSS
Okay.
model. So if she explains
I'm
MTSS,
sorry,
it will
yeah.
help. Assume they know nothing.
Jargon buster.
Yes.
Could you just tell the acronym out loud?
Yes, it's the multi-tiered system of support. It's the old RTII, the Response to Intervention and Instruction, if you're familiar with that. That was several years ago, and it was a special ed initiative. And it's generally the same, but we're renaming it because it really is a general ed framework. It's not an initiative. It's a framework that we want schools to look at in a way to support all students, not just students who are necessarily on IEPs or identified as having a disability. So I'll just read you this. I actually was online last night looking around for a definition of MTSS, and Kansas has a really great definition to which I believe matches ours. And it's a coherent continuum of evidence-based system-wide practices that support a rapid response to academic and behavioral needs with frequent data-based monitoring for instructional decision-making to empower each student to achieve high standards. So what does that mean? So it's a continuum of services for students, and we talk about tiers. In Vermont, we're looking more at it as a cycling in and out of instruction, interventions for instruction. It starts with UDL, Universal Design for Learning. So all kids have to have access to the first level of good instruction. All kids, no matter who they are, even the kids with the most intensive needs, should have access to content, highly qualified content teachers, and what that looks like. If a student then is struggling, perhaps maybe they're in a math lesson and they're not understanding fractions, and that's seemingly holding them back to move forward with their next math piece, then that student might be given some, we call it targeted instruction. That's the second level. So that student will remain with the group, the first good instruction, but get a little bit of targeted instruction, something that might be really tricky or hard for them to understand. And then level 3 is the intensive level, and that means that kids get even a little bit more than the targeted instruction. For example, there might be a student who is moving along really well, and then something traumatic happens in their life. Maybe a parent dies, or there's something going on in their life, and they need just a short amount of time of really intensive counseling or mental health support or something in that way, and then they filter back out of that. So it's more of a cycle. We called it multi-tiered system of support, but it's really, in Vermont, we're trying to make it. There's a misconception that once you're in level 1, you move to level 2 and you never go back to level 1. It's not like being on an IEP where you're always on an IEP, you're always getting that targeted instruction. This is more of a cycling in and out as you need it. So it's looking at not your handicap or your disability, but looking at what do you need? What is the need? For all kids, we want to build a system of support in all schools so that no matter who you are, where you come from, or what your learning needs are, that each school is prepared to support those needs without a student necessarily being on an IEP. So we're looking at lowering our numbers of students who are on IEPs or who are labeled with a disability. So it's a non-categorical system of support for students.
Just to help clarify, because I'm not sure people understand the connection between that and funding. One of the ways that we fund is that people have to document the time and the cost of services delivered, which means you actually have to be able to show that you actually delivered the services in order to get the reimbursement. But if you think about the model that Cindy just described, which is a very flexible and responsive model, if you just provide targeted intervention to kids when they need it, you may actually not be able to document that you're providing services because you've been so effective at providing them just when they need them that they actually don't need the services. So paradoxically, we've set up a model that doesn't necessarily allow us to provide services the way we want in a more flexible way. And that's something that Michael Giangreco will speak to when he comes back. Does that help clarify a little bit? It's complicated.
Yeah, it becomes a barrier because if you have a student on an IEP, the state reimburses those services at a particular level. And without those students on IEPs, you don't get the special ed funding. So yeah, it's definitely a barrier because we want to support all kids and especially kids with disabilities. But if we do the system and they're not identified, there's no money, and then we lose resources. So yeah, it's.
So Giangreco talks, for example, about census models that base support not based on the number of kids identified, but on your total population size, because we know that certain disabilities appear at a certain ratio or proportion.
Yeah.
So it's a different way of thinking about it that allows you to have this kind of more flexible approach.
Mm-hmm. Right, and then there's a whole discussion about paraeducators and how many paraeducators we have in the state, and he talks about that and how we can even it out and have more content specialists or coaches, math and reading teachers with several special educators who have that certification and license and background knowledge for teaching these kids. Yeah, so that's the funding piece. The big thing, and I have a couple more minutes, I guess. How long do I have?
If you could wrap it up in 5 minutes, that'd be
Okay,
great.
I can, for sure. So, the other big bucket is federal accountability and state rules and regulations. And for me, as the special ed director, there's the APR, which is the annual performance report that, as a state, we have to report to the federal government, OSEP, which is the Office of Special Ed Programs, how well we're doing on 17 indicators. This past year, it used to be 20 indicators, and they've changed it to be 17 indicators now, with the 17th indicator being something called the SSIP, or the State Systemic Improvement Plan. They've now challenged every state to be more accountable to outcomes for kids. What it used to be was completely compliance. In fact, I brought this great little map I wanted to show you. The determinations used to be based on compliance. Are your T's crossed and your I's dotted and you're following all the rules? And the green, I'll just show you this. This is last year. All the green are the states who met determinations. They were all compliant. This is what it looks like if we're all compliant. What they did this past year was they added the results-driven accountability piece to it. And that meant that they want to see outcomes for actual outcomes versus are all your IEPs filled out adequately. And now it looks like the green are student outcomes and how well are kids actually doing versus how good are your IEPs. Vermont is green. Vermont is green in both. However, when I first saw this, everybody jumped up and down and said, yay, we're great, we're making determinations, but we still have a lot of gaps. There's still a lot of achievement gaps, so I didn't want this to fool us and make us say, well, we're done, we don't have to, we'll just keep doing what we're doing. It's definitely not what we want to do. So the SSIP now has challenged us to pull together stakeholders from across the state. We have to choose one of the 17 indicators, and we have to show improved outcomes for students across the state. And this is literally State Improvement Plan, okay? State Systemic Improvement Plan, so SSIP is its little nickname, yes. So I'm charged with making sure that we have a plan. It's a 5-year plan. The first year, this year, is phase 1, and in this year we have to come up with how we're gonna do that. We first of all have to choose what we're gonna do and how will we know we've done it. So we did a lot of research. We talked to a lot of people. We found, we knew this, but and maybe you don't know this, but our population of students with emotional disabilities is way above the national average. The national average is about 6% of students with disabilities have an emotional disability. In Vermont, it's 16% of our students with disabilities are labeled as having an emotional disability. It's really high. We're not sure why that is. We've talked about lots of different reasons that could be. I have all that data. I certainly could show it to you.
My understanding is we're the highest.
We're the highest. Yeah. We absolutely are the highest. The next lowest state is 13%. So, and then it goes down to, I think, 10% and then 8%. Yeah, but 6% in the country, and we're 16%. So we have a lot of digging to do to figure out why is that. We have a lot of different ideas. Of course, I have a team together. We're working on a root cause analysis right now, and I'm in contact with a bunch of districts who are actually doing really good things for this population of kids. We have to show progress through one of the 17 indicators, and the one we picked was assessment. So we're going to be focused in on students with emotional disabilities in grades 3, 4, and 5, and we're going to measure their progress through math assessment. We're going to look at the SBAC and see how they did. Now, that is a little off because students with emotional disabilities, it's usually a mental health issue versus an educational issue. However, it shows up in education because they're not accessing what they need to access in order to learn. There's too many things going on in their world to even think about doing math or reading or science. So, however, ultimately, we'd like to be able to have a system where we support those mental health needs, and that in turn helps their academic achievement. So we're looking long term here, but I do know that there's schools and districts, I take that back, schools at least that I know of, that are making progress with students with emotional disabilities in lots of really great ways. And so I'm going to go to them and find out what their indicators are and how they know those students are making progress, and then we'll try to replicate that across the state and see if those are some of the factors, some of the reasons that kids are doing better, and hopefully turn around their achievement. And then ultimately that will support all kids, and we'll see as a state that all of those all of our students with disabilities might have been helped by this plan that we have over the next 5 or 6 years for students with disabilities. We do have to also rate a scale-up plan. So while we're only focusing right now on 3, 4, and 5 in a couple of districts, our plan will be to bring that out to the whole state. But we're talking about working with the mental health system, the justice system, AHS, and Department of Health. We're going to bring in all of those really important stakeholders because we're going to need all of them. The other really cool thing about that is the 0 to 3 population is also going to be working with us. So I'm in contact with Daniel Howes, who's in charge of Part C, and so we're going to work together to try to start little, and work with communities and parents and mental health agencies and move this in a direction where we can finally see academic achievement improve for this population of kids, and hopefully for all kids. The reason we picked math was because our math scores generally across the state for all kids, any kid, are low. We think they're low. So maybe by doing some of these strategies and looking really deeply into what's going on with math for students with emotional disabilities, we can also improve math scores and achievement for the general population. So that's one of my biggest projects.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's wonderful. We look forward to working with you.
Great.
And I'm sure you'll be back here very soon.
Yeah,
So, thank
I
you.
will. Thanks.
So the good news is if the 16% and we're high, but we're still green, that's even better.
Yes.
There you go. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you.
So I think we'll break for lunch now. Yes.
So I think a few months ago, we parked parking lot is like in a few months, so I was kind of wondering.
It's going to take us a little time to finish that
Great
drafting.
point. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll recess for lunch. We try to get back a little before 1:30. And I think the first item we'll take up when we come back is item L. And if you don't, yeah, that's what we'll do. And I'm not sure that Bonnie's not here, so I don't think there's anything really to discuss under item M. But the bulk of our afternoon session will be under the legislative agenda. So let's shoot for 1:25. Lunch, I think. You want to take her out of here, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
If possible.
Okay. Okay.
Right now?
No, 2:30. I'll call the meeting back to order.
That was on camera, whoops.
What I would propose for the agenda this afternoon is we're going to get a quick update on the pre-K rulemaking from Rebecca, and we'll take up the military compact agenda item. We're going to skip the strategic plan, then we'll go to Bill and see if we can come to consensus on legislative issues, and then Dylan, and then we'll do the resolution last. So, not hearing any objections to that?
What about item L? You left that out. I'm assuming we're going to do that one first then?
That's what he just said.
That's
I
the,
just said.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
Would you send her the tape so she knows that she wasn't listening?
Oh, Stephen.
It's like the first time Chris has not been listening.
David, you don't know me, but my sense of humor gets worse as the day goes on. Rebecca.
Yeah. Lucky you're done.
I'm going to be quick in the interest of time. Not much has happened. We are still engaged in working out some final details around the pre-K rules. We are very, very close to resolution and look forward to having a further update at the next meeting. There are a couple tricky issues that were still outstanding. We are in the process of resolving them right now.
Thank you. I would then go to item L. David, if you'd want to come up to the front of the table. And I would turn to Rebecca for her recommendation.
We are thrilled to bring before us David Young and to nominate him for this position of the Compact Commissioner to serve on the Interstate Commission on Education Opportunity for Military Children. We are thrilled to have David as the nominee because he has both a very strong and distinguished career as an educator in the state of Vermont at multiple levels, but he also has experience in the service and understands the importance of this issue. The logic behind this is to ensure that the military families, when they are forced to relocate in the name of service, don't have to worry about their children. Their children we're going to do what we can as they move across systems within the United States, sometimes internationally, to make sure that they are supported in those transitions, placed efficiently into schools, so that there's a seamless and minimal disruption in their educational process, so that they are well served and well taken care of while their parents are serving on behalf of us. So with that, I'd love to have David be our next commissioner, and I'd also love to have you give a couple words about why this is interesting to you and
Sure.
what
So
you'd like
again,
to do with this position.
thanks for having me here. I know that you have a lot on your agenda, and so I know that I didn't necessarily need to come, but I think it's important to put a face with a name. This is important, similar to all the other topics that you're talking about in supporting students in the state of Vermont, and certainly for those that are deployed or families that are part of the military are also a big part of our community. So I'm happy to be here to talk to you and put a face with a name. You know, I will tell you that part of the reason why I came back into education was because of, you know, the need for students. I thought I was going to go far away. I graduated from Norwich University and then went through all of my various training, and then was reactivate a new division, the 10th Mountain Division, that was then going to be up in Watertown, New York. Used to be Camp Drum. So I was one of 15 officers to go back there. And while I was there, I would tell you that the state of education in our country was, to me, questioned. Many of the soldiers, again, Combat Arms Division, which is all male, I will be honest to tell you that many of them had very, very poor literacy skills. Very, very, very smart. But throughout that period of time, reaffirmed for me to come back into the military or into education as a result of seeing some of those inequities. Individuals that were 24, 5, 6 years old that couldn't read to their young children. So I started to do some things around helping them to become more literate. And so I still stay in contact with some of those folks now. But I would say also this is a part of my fabric, too, around ensuring that all parents who are going to give birth to a child understand their important role in educating their youth. So those of you who also know me, I also talk about the continuum of the process of a learner, starting from their mom and dad and guardian, is a really critical part. So I'm happy to be part of the military compact. I will tell you that I don't think there's been a lot of information shared, and that's not necessarily a negative to the individual that was before me. But, you know, I've certainly attended a fair amount of superintendent meetings and principal meetings and educator meetings, but I haven't really heard about it. And so I think there's an opportunity here for this to be, you know, provided some details to my colleagues. But I also will tell you, in my learning a little bit more about this when I first looked at it, and I told Stephen briefly, there's a lot of pretty good takeaways around the military compact, around ensuring equity for all, looking at systems that support all, looking at ways in which that can happen around policy and procedures. So at the same time, Vermont's struggling around a more equitable distribution of education and how we do that. There's some great takeaways in here in some of the literature. So I'm eager to learn a little bit more. So
Thank you, and thank you for your willingness to serve. I presume your schedule is busy as it is, but...
It is. I mean, I think that, you know, a lot of this seems to be, there's an annual meeting, and I'm obviously, I think there needs to be some interjections with the Principals Association, the Superintendents Association, through some of the individuals that were here earlier, Jeff and Steve. But I don't see it as an unreasonable amount of time, and I think it's very appropriate. So
we have a recommendation. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Sean Marie has moved that we appoint David Young as Vermont's Compact Commissioner to serve the Interstate Commission on Educational Opportunity. There was a second, Mark seconded. Any discussion? Not hearing any. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Those opposed say no. Well, you know, you better learn how to run a meeting.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
And for the record, the vote was unanimous.
I wonder if he gets more than $50 a day.
Don't go there. So, we'll now turn to Bill and for a discussion of our legislative agenda in light of what's happening across the street.
Okay.
And just very quickly, what I'm hoping we can do here is come to a consensus on some major points that, you know, that Bill And I, on occasion, when he lets me, can go to the legislature and represent the State Board of Education's role in all this. Just very quickly, you heard reference earlier that we both testified last week. I was on the phone, obviously, and Bill threatened if I went on too long or said too much, he would pull the phone plug. So I was very quick.
Could you do that now?
Yeah, I guess I So, Bill, take it away.
Bill actually dialing under the table, so he has to go out of the room.
So I'm in charge now. So
And by the
Bill,
time
would you
he
like
gets
to say
back-
what you testified about?
He's out of the room. Go for it.
Oh, I sent you copies of the stuff, which is my serious answer, but I think when he comes back, we ought to say all in favor, aye.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Lead the charge.
That's me?
Yes. When Steve walks
So
in.
I think, but do you know what Stephen wants right now? He wants to have a consensus or a discussion about.
Yeah, and I thought that we had two options. We could take the Stacy option, which is to say that both the House and the Senate bill are junk and we want to put forth their own principles. Or we
Is that
could,
what Stacy said?
or we could go through this in a systematic way in terms of the major points and then see what we think about it. So we're,
So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
What did you vote on?
We just adopted our position for the,
I'm joking.
okay.
You have a sense of humor.
Yeah, I know, I got it.
We're working on it. For the memo, I'd start off with introduction, say some positive things about the state board, wanting to work with the people and be glad to work with you as the process develops and so forth. I also want to reiterate staffing. No matter what you do, make sure that we got the proper staffing or else it doesn't work.
But put that at the end. Don't lead off with that.
Okay.
So it doesn't look like it's self-serving, that, we're not just doing this because we want staff.
Yeah, I'll put it at the end. It's an important point, regardless
Yeah, I
of
don't
which way it
disagree with you,
comes
but
out.
I don't want to, it might be a negative.
Sure.
Well, I think though, just to interject here, it's not, I see the emphasis more on the staffing for AOE than the emphasis on the SBE.
It depends
that's-
on whether you take the House version or the Senate version.
That's correct. I would agree with that too, but I'm just saying that in terms of, not being negative, Stephen, I'm just thinking that it's more about making sure that the agency is staffed to do these things.
But I just think it's not the most important thing we have to offer on this.
Right.
And so
Okay.
that's why I say, I don't disagree with you on both AOE and SBE staffing, but it really ought to be at the end.
Yeah, I can word that diplomatically, but it goes in there regardless of who ends up doing what.
Right.
And the first thing we need to talk about is the top topic, which in the HEC column is section number 1 and is section number 7 in the Secretary-Governor thing, which is the basic structure of how this thing happens. I don't know how much everybody's up to speed on this, but basically all the supervisory unions turn into supervisory districts in some kind of fashion by 2018 in the House bill, unless one opts out, and which means you have to have a positive vote to go as a loner or go somewhere else. And the alternative plan is something that concerns me in the sense is that it could be the wild, wild west with all those combinations. And as Steve Dale was talking about, and I was just seeing visions of thousands of different one-off arrangements around the state, and I found that to be a little bit wide open, and if we don't put some kind of parameters around this thing, if you think the current system's chaos, try this.
Bill, can I just chime in on that? I think when I hear we don't like the one-size-fits-all model, or the one-size-fits-all model doesn't work, I think people are saying we don't want to be told what to do, more so than they're saying we don't want it. They don't like the top down, but I agree with you. I think creating an open-ended thing seems like even a worse situation. If we could come up with you have 4 choices, or you have 3, like some, here are the give, like you say to a child, you can get dressed now, or you can get dressed in 1 minute. Like, give them some choice, but with some very kind of clear, at least for me, that would feel pretty important, that there was some voice within some clear parameters.
And if there were parameters, maybe if they saw themselves as outside of those choices, then coming to the state board.
I don't know. Sorry.
But, or to another, looking at that, but like, if you're going to have, these are the options, because instead of having 18, then we could have 50. Maybe here are these 4, but if you feel like you're outside of these, just come bring your idea to another body.
I'd like to clarify this 1, 2, and 3. So what does it mean a district opts out through a process involving the state board and voter approval? So that's a big deal. I mean, you warn something, you have to have the language right. I mean, what is it that they're going to vote on that they don't want to be part of the supervisory district? And who implements that by 2018 that the supervisory union is now a supervisory district? And in technical terms, the supervisory district has 1 board, not
That's correct.
not.
Can I make a suggestion? If we're gonna get into this level of detail, this is gonna be pretty difficult at this point. This is gonna change, and it'll change probably several times. We're early in the process. I think we need to look at this more from a conceptual point of view. Are we in favor of, a change in the governance, and into bigger districts with, whatever criteria you want to put in there, but, to get into, whether this is the right approach or that's the wrong approach, these approaches may not even be on the board in a week or two.
I like that, Stephen. And for example, I mean, one of the things that we've heard today, a lot is sort of the school choice. It really mucks up the water. So for those that aren't involved with school choice, are we able to say, what is it that we're looking for, and can we come to some kind of consensus for that, and then deal with those districts and SUs that have school choice embedded with them, so that we're separating it out, because I think at some point it's going to come down to that.
Okay.
I mean, I think, and I keep repeating myself, that, as many guidelines as they can give us in legislation and timeframes, that's great. But, in the end, if it seems like the direction is that this board is going to be making a lot of the decisions on how we reform our governance system.
Well,
But I don't think we can get into the detail of how that's going to happen right now. It's just too early, I think.
And it won't stick.
Yeah.
So I guess my point being is that I think that if we agreed in concept with these, section 1, I think personally I couldn't possibly agree to that with 1, 2, and 3 in there, because to me you're opening up the door for more districts versus less districts. And what I support is larger K through 12 bodies around the state.
Bingo.
And- But that's
I would
not
agree.
what section 1 is.
No.
But that's the general
see,
concept.
that's the point I'm trying to make,
Okay.
is that
Yeah.
you agree to that concept, but you don't have the details of how it's going to happen, because you're really, we can't do that today, I don't think.
Okay, so everybody's agreed is to, and I'll work on the wording on this, but the wild, wild west of recreating more kinds of structures, we don't want.
So if we say we have 13 different types of governance structures now,
We could end up
We-
with 300.
we want less than.
Right.
Than the current.
Okay, now ideally, we're not going to get down to 1. We know that, and that's not realistic, but certainly less than 13. And I don't know how many, I don't know how many governance structures you lose if you take out the non-choice schools and say you're all going to become, a red. somehow, some way, different processes to get there, different time schedules with a drop-dead date of some sort, or if you opt out, there has to be a real good reason to be opting out.
But we want some clear public policy guidelines and a
So-
time frame.
So larger school districts encompassing pre-K through 12 by 2020.
That was going to be my next question. I think 2018 is pretty unrealistic.
Pretty quick.
In terms of voting, that's, if there's any sort of vote that needs to be taken by people, it can't be this year. It's already been warned. So next year would be the earliest. And so that would be for the 2016-2017 school budget. 2018 is very close in terms of school budgets.
2020 may be a good date. I think it may rush things, but
So 2020, you're appointed in 2015, and 6 years is 2021, so you and Krista will still be here. And then you're going to bring on some of the new ones, so I think 2020 is realistic without.
I'm thinking about the planning time locally.
To go well, you need to have significant community involvement.
No way.
Prior to a vote. So I think 2020 gives you enough time to have significant community. Even if you go to districts, there's still a tremendous amount of work about structure and how you organize that has to happen with public input.
I wanted to ask you, Rebecca, you said earlier that locals are talking about this stuff in a much greater way than what they were. Do you think that this has got enough traction, or do you... Jeff had raised the apprehension that talks talk, but I think it's something more than that.
I think it's more than that. My first year here, no one came into my office asking how you consolidate. I hear a lot of, we're getting calls. We are getting calls. And they're not talking about, what they're talking about is how they can use scale, at least at some level, to try to provide better quality opportunities for their kids. And I am hearing that much more broadly than I did. I think we're seeing movement. I think people are hesitant to move given the conversation that's taking place here, because they don't want to put in a tremendous amount of work and then have something happen at the state level that then undercuts what they've done. So there's a bit of uncertainty until there's some clear direction from the
Right.
legislature which way they're headed.
Yeah. The difference in change philosophy between the two is that the Senate makes it permissive that the local district opts to join with another, which is a very local process, and the House bill basically says, do something by 2020 or we hit you with the hammer. What is the appropriate change mechanism we want to employ? Not to use loaded terms or anything.
Well, one of the, I don't know if this goes to your question or not, but one of the thoughts I had is that one of these approaches, and maybe it was the Senate version, where the locals would decide what they wanted to do and then come to the board for ratification.
Right.
I think that's reversed. I think if you put the board in the position of having to undo something that locals have already voted on, you're headed for a crash. So the way I would organize this, and maybe this is more deep, maybe I'm contradicting myself on detail here, is, look, my wife is not here to correct me, let me alone. Is that it would be much better to get the board and AOE working with the locals to come up with a plan,
Yeah.
and then take it to the voters, I think.
I would agree. I think that it's always hard to undo to go against the will of the, plus I think what's happened, in at least what I've seen in practice, is that what comes to the locals before it comes to a governing body like this can create some kind of misinformation, whereas if it comes to the AOE and/or the state board, there's a concrete plan with details that then gets presented to the public, instead of the public hearing the kind of probably an emotional side of what might actually be taking place.
Are we getting into details?
A little bit.
Okay. No, 'cause
Mine's too.
you go first.
Mine's detail. Is there any reason that we should consider encouraging looking at other divisions we already have across the state? For instance, like the way the AHS boundaries do not line up with the AOE boundaries. And when, especially in light of what Cindy Moran was talking about, how many of our kids need those interventions in terms of emotional wellness? Could we remove some of the emotion if we said to people, it's not that you have to collaborate with this school that you've always been rivals with in football, it's we're going to look at all these new regions that aren't necessarily about your schools, but they're about providing the best continuity of services for, we're talking, these are the same kids that we're talking about. I mean, is there any way to look at, I don't know what other agencies have divided the state up into regions, but it feels like we should at least all be using the same regions.
Well, that's,
We've
and that's a
talked
more
about
natural
that.
partner because so many of our our clients overlap.
Maybe a bit late to introduce that thought,
I'm
though.
going to go across the street and introduce it
Well-
right now.
Well, we have in our legislative, we've talked about that in our committee, and talked about that realigning school districts with the agency. It makes sense, and maybe not going towards counties, but maybe going towards schools. And I know we've talked about that in committee.
Right.
And if I'm remembering correctly what Steve was saying, that might be some of the integrated pre-K-12 criteria. If that's embedded there and it's given weight, that will help steer that direction as well.
How many AHS
Regions.
are there?
It's by county.
So it's 16?
So, and then like when we were at Dillon
14
School,
counties.
and they serve 3 counties, so they're dealing with 3 different sets of agencies for that one school.
Maybe you make mention of that in your report and not make it a requirement, but, one thing they might look at.
Right, and because it's right, it's the same customer, the same people that we're working with, and how those relationships happen.
I'll put in something that they should take into consideration
So 3
that,
school districts per county.
yeah. Well,
Don't even talk
I wouldn't even try to
counties.
make it county because it's so broken up across
Don't
the
even talk
state.
counties, because that'll scare people, that'll
Yeah.
turn people off.
Just, I was going to comment on the district opt-out language because I'm unclear, Bill, how you're interpreting it, given some of the other comments you've made. But the voter approval, whether it's the voter approval of the district choosing to opt out or whether it's the voter approval in the rest of the SU that's being left,
I
would
thought
have
it was
different
the
effects.
local district.
Right, and that would have a different effect than having it be the voters of the entire system.
Well, I could just see Middlebury Union High School opting out of Addison Central, which is to take the center out of the donut, and, weird things can happen there.
That was my concern, the way it's written.
Details, just details.
Are we in agreement on small school support should disappear over some time and the hold harmless provision should evaporate over time?
I want to at least talk about that some. There's 3 different pieces there that I think are operative. Max loss, if they steepen the curve on that one to phase it out, such as the House is doing, that makes a certain amount of sense to me. The small schools thing, I'm finding myself asking, is this really a legitimate thing, or is this really a tool that's being used to force people to do things? If
It's
a
contradictory, though.
Huh?
To me, it's contradictory. If we're trying to come up with a better governance system, why do we fund some of these small districts that are not in line with what we're trying to do?
Well, it depends, to me, and it gets into this concept of necessarily small or isolated, whatever that is, which begs a whole bunch of interpretation questions. But of the areas in which I'm just not sure where the data is or what the research says on it, that would be the one. I don't have the same reservations about maximum loss.
So, Bill, are you saying that because you don't know the impact of taking it away, or what the benefit is of having it, you're just unsure?
Yes.
So
Which gets back to our position on categorical weights, and this is, to me, is just one of the categorical weights that need to be looked at from top to bottom.
Well, I will tell you that, again, this is details, is that the grade of 20 seems that if you could lower that number, it may have more of an impact. I mean, a grade of 20, it could be a class of 20. I don't know. I mean, I don't know where these numbers came from. They seem kind of a school less than 100 and a grade less than 20.
What section is that in?
I think it comes from the
That's
fact
the law.
that if you have a grade, I think it's in deference to the desire for small class sizes in the state and the reality that if you start getting a grade of 30, for example, you're looking at 2 sections, additional teachers. I mean, I think it was an effort to, I'm assuming, try to address that.
So if you have a grade less than 20,
You've got 1 teacher per grade.
right,
I think 20 is probably on the high side then.
yeah.
Especially
So you think that the small school grant ought to be continued in some form?
I think that I don't remember whether it was the House or the Senate version that says there are some places where it will be geographically necessary, and the state board makes a determination as to whether that's geographically necessary.
All right, but the philosophy that we're supporting is that the small school grants ought to be phased out
Unless geographic.
unless geographic necessity requires it to remain.
Right, and both versions allow an exception for geographic necessity. One puts that in the state board's hand, and one leaves it in the secretary's hands.
Yeah, okay. I don't care who makes the determination. In one sense, when I was talking with the House committee, I was saying that shouldn't put you on the spot, or whoever the secretary is, unless you wanted to be put on that spot, but
The virtue of having it at the state board level is it's a public and transparent decision, which allows a right of
That's
appeal in a
detail.
hearing.
We don't
Yeah.
need to get into that.
well, that's important. I think we agree.
I'm sorry.
Do you want me to show you how to turn your ringer off?
It's been a crisis late in the day, me too. So when it comes to the small school grant, what if you have multi-districts that come together, one, they have a governance consolidation, and there are some schools that are getting the small school grant. What about a period of time for them to continue to get that small schools grant until such time that it's sunsets?
And I would
Transitional period.
I like that, but here's the reality of it, how I read it, again, how, is that if that small school is now no longer its own district and it's part of a bigger district, then the bigger district gets that small schools grant. So it actually lowers their cost per pupil.
No, they don't.
It doesn't?
No. So when you merge, my understanding is you lose your small schools. So CESU is giving up their small schools grant, I believe.
I
So
think
this
in
is
the House version, is Jill here?
No. Oh, yes, sorry.
In the I thought that Dave Sharp told me that if they merge, the larger district that the smaller district is in, then gets that grant.
Oh, I thought that too. From the House.
That's how I understood it, too.
And that's how I understood it. So then it lowers the cost per pupil for all of them if they're a single district.
But only for, there's a transition period. It covers transition costs, but then it's
For 3
gone for
years.
3 years. So when you commit to merging, you're committing to giving up your small schools grant.
And it just buys
Well,
time for
you're
those.
agreeing to share it.
You
Well,
share it in the transition to
Right.
support a merger, and then it's gone.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, do we
it's-
support that?
I support that.
Because I support that.
And that's similar to what
That's very
Aquaman.
similar, right.
So they-
What's that?
Students support.
Job done.
What are you supporting?
Keeping the small school grants reserved for
It's
3
basically
years
the
into the larger SD.
Right.
It goes into the larger district, but do they keep that money forever?
No,
Years.
3 years.
As a transition, to
It's
cover
a
transition.
transition cost,
So
to
we
support
don't
transition
say,
costs.
we could agree that we think it should be phased out over a period of time and let them decide if it's 3 years, 5 years, but not indefinitely, or you wouldn't get the savings.
So my other question is then, is it more of an incentive to merge, that you can keep it for the next 3 years or until this time, and then other ones will be phased out? if you decide, I mean, that's,
I think the assumption is that there are additional costs associated with transition, so you would use those resources in the transition to offset those transition costs, but that down the road, because of efficiencies, you won't need it.
no, but I
is the
mean,
logic.
schools that decide not to merge, so will they be able to keep their small school grant?
The thing is I'm trying to look at this empirically, and when I do that and ask myself what this thing is without getting caught in a circle, I don't know whether this thing is a necessity or not.
You mean to have it at all?
Yes, and if so, how much it should be.
This is just one of those anomalies where you get all different ways that your equalized pupil rate gets determined, because there are all the different factors.
Yeah. But, okay,
We could bring in data at the next meeting. I mean, we have a report. I believe the number of small schools is increasing, but the total number of students in those small schools collectively is not actually increasing that much because these schools are getting smaller. So it's possible that we might have some data which would empirically give you some context of what we're dealing with.
yeah, it would tell me what they're actually spending, but it doesn't answer the should question, and I don't know how to
Well, what
answer.
it might give you is a sense of what proportion of what they're spending the small schools subsidy actually is, since I believe it's driven in part by census. If you are becoming very small, what you're eligible will not be very big. Just a thought.
The last chart that
We'll
I
find
saw.
out how big an issue it is. I think you need to know that. It's going to depend on it will depend on where you are and how big you are, but we can give you that data so you can see
Okay.
empirically what you're dealing with.
Okay.
And it actually, I think that same chart, if it's already been given out, which I think I saw.
It's been out.
It shows you how much how much the grant attributes to the equalized pupil rate, is how it was broken down
Yeah.
per student. So it's, $100 or $1,000 or however towards that equalized pupil rate.
Okay. Well, for now, it seems like everybody's leaning towards transition out and phase out over a few years, except for yours truly, so I can count.
Well, it's unfortunate that some of us have been involved in this issue for so long, and this is now going to go into effect after some of us have left the board.
Well, that's why 2020, there'll still be two of them here.
It seems to me that you were designing the time frame so some of us won't be here.
Well,
That's 2 years, Steve, it's not gonna happen.
why would one set oneself up for purgatory?
Oh, well, I may come and watch when you get into this.
You know, this could be very exciting times if the state board is doing a lot of these approvals. And anyway, and we agree that the new centralized district, whatever we call it, would be phased out of the small schools grant after a period of time.
And as well as the, what do they call it? The hold harmless provision?
Oh, the hold harmless, it's in here somewhere.
Yeah, but I mean, we ought to support that, I think, as well. The phasing out of it.
Yeah, that's on the second page, top of the second page, and we're about to get there. Do we want to say anything about this tuition question?
No.
I would like to tell you the truth. I kind of agree with it.
Where?
On number 2.
Yeah, sure.
You talking about the first sentence?
Yeah,
Except for the New Hampshire district.
Yeah,
yeah.
Truly creative.
yeah, we can, I can support that.
No, actually, the one I created is.
Is it not there? Isn't it
but they're not
Rivendell is in New
tuition.
Hampshire.
Oh.
Yeah, but we're not tuitioning.
I would assume that
Isn't there one in New York State, too?
There are schools.
there's some tuition students that come in from Granville, I believe,
To Salem.
but
New
they're,
York.
I don't think there's organizational structure.
There's also a lot of students who attend Stansted Academy in Quebec, and it's really the only option because of isolation. So we actually do have students who go to Canada.
Really? Okay.
But
And
we
they-
also have
and
some
they
that go
need
to
to.
Sweden, right? And different areas and like international.
Right, but we do, I mean, my point is, it is complicated because there are
Right.
places
Reason-
where
yeah.
students really do need to be able to go.
And so we're
Yeah.
supporting that.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll write that up into the draft, which I'll circulate to everybody before we do anything. Declining enrollment, hold harmless provision.
Yep.
Here, at least in my thinking, it's just a matter of, do you steepen the curve or not? I wouldn't eliminate the thing entirely, but currently you lose 3.5%, and then in the next year you lose 3.5% of the previous year's number, and so forth.
No, it should go away. I mean, maybe it takes a year or two to go away, but it should go away. This is silly that we're doing this.
No, actually, there's about, I'm going to guess 35 states that have some kind of hold harmless provision, and they go the other way too in terms of growth. So it's a pretty common feature which protects people and lets them down. Are we going down too slow? I think probably we are.
Both of the pieces on the table include some shortening of the tail. So you
Yeah.
can take your pick about which way to shorten the tail.
I think we ought to just generally support,
I
the
think so too.
The idea.
the idea of folding it up, yeah.
Generally support.
Well, tech centers are held to a 6-semester average, or
Is it 6 or 4?
6.
That's a
It's a
3-year.
So
rolling,
it's 3 years.
rolling 3-year
You drop off
average.
one, you pick up one at the end, though.
Right.
Or in the beginning, I mean, it's
Which
it's
makes
an
it,
average.
and our problem is currently,
Right.
it's actually not, it's not fixed to a rolling average, it's fixed to your initial year of decline,
Right,
which
it
is part of
doesn't
why the
drop.
tail takes so long.
Yeah, that's a different thing than a
see
rolling
doing a
average, rolling ADM.
Some stabilizing is necessary because, populations do fluctuate. I think no one contemplated the prolonged declines that we've had and that we are expected to have in some regions when this was
But
planned.
with larger school districts, however they take shape, this is less of an issue.
Right.
So that's why I say, don't encourage, the continuation of small districts, get rid of this.
Yeah, if these particular schools are rolled into a larger district, this problem goes away.
That's correct.
So it's more of a penalty for we'll pick on Huntington, staying out of, the modified, the mud.
What about in
Genovese.
terms of a compromise kind of principle is simply is to examine the steepness or how fast the tail goes out and adjust it and say in so many words is the tail drags out too long.
Well, that's what this does. This basically steepens the curve and then drops it from your initial.
Both of them have 3-year transition phases.
That's fine.
That's good.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it should go away completely, but Stephen thinks so. What do you folks think?
Well, I don't think we're saying completely, but having that tail, you need that little bit of
saying
buffer,
it-
like Rebecca was saying.
Shorten it, squash it.
Squash the tail.
Well,
Okay, that's a
squash
good
the-
metaphor.
We're in the mud, we're cutting tails off.
Yeah, let me get that down.
But just not that you can have situations where the population drops rapidly and then there's the phantom student problem.
30
Right.
non-existent students.
So there should be, from
actually-
year to year, you need some insulation because there might be a little spike here and there, but it just seems like when a third of the school is make-believe, we've gone off the deep end.
Yeah, actually, hold harmless in theory, in straight arithmetic will resolve itself over time. But it simply hasn't been our experience that it resolved itself.
I think part of it is because, again, the declines have gone on for so long, and so
That's
pa-
it.
the power of this is actually signaling more than it is real effect.
Yeah, yeah.
It's reminding people that this is a continuing pattern, and we need to be looking forward and thinking about how we want to plan for a future with fewer children.
Yeah. Okay, I've got enough to draft something there. Redistricting, this is the Senate plan. Do we want to comment on that? Or if so, in what way?
This is the orphan
This is the orphan, yeah.
language.
Orphans, I think, are a different problem.
Challenge.
This,
Well, the orphan would be somebody who's left out when the music stops playing. But this has to do with continuing the same organization structure as I read the Senate bill, and keep me honest on this. But somebody could petition to go next door or something,
yeah, that's,
which is allowable under current law.
Yeah, it's basically what we have the authority to do now, which is
Yeah,
move lines.
so that's fine.
well, this is different
Except that
because
they can
this is,
petition.
this is redistricting, though, not reassignment to an SU. It's different.
So it permits the state board to add a petitioning district to an existing union school or pre-K 12 district.
It's saying that if you have a, yeah, it goes beyond what the authority you currently have.
But basically, we're going to be asked if you can be assigned to Dillon. Right? I
Yes.
mean, that this group can be assigned
Well,
to
they
that
could do that now. They could
But the
petition.
difference, but the difference is it will be one municipal entity, it'll be one district. It won't be an SU of two districts that now work together.
I don't think we need to get into this.
Yeah.
I think just as long as it's clear that a process involving all districts and voters, I mean, I think the success of what we witnessed last week, or last month in Rochester, was finally you had a superintendent who who wanted to receive. And I think unless the vote, unless, I don't know how, if Burlington says, hi, please reassign us to Winooski, and Winooski doesn't want, I don't think you're not going to set up a relationship that works. There's got to, I don't know, that's, after a process involving all districts and voters, I don't know really what that means, but I think it would need to be approved by
Well,
or
although,
something.
take us back to Sandgate, remember that whole incident? And the receiving district wouldn't accept them, even though the superintendent was in support of accepting them?
I would rather force the receiving district to to participate and
Yes.
be involved in the conversation. I don't know, I think the not returning phone calls piece is always seemed to me like a ridiculous part, but I don't think us just reassigning, maybe this just wouldn't come up, but I don't think just us redistricting creates a collaboration for kids that's going to be successful.
It doesn't. I think I agree. And I'm not,
I think
Just
we
to
just stay out of
clarify,
it,
yeah.
Bill. Just stay out of
I don't
this
think
one.
that was the intent of this proposal,
Okay.
but I think you can stay out of it if you wish.
That's good.
Okay, what we said earlier was that if there's any effort towards redistricting or so forth, is to involve the AEO, the agency specialist, to counsel and guide them and so forth, and we can keep that. Superintendent and principal duties.
I have a problem with this.
Really?
I think one big problem with this is,
I think that,
yeah.
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, depending what happens in so many other arenas, I think there'll have to be a rediscussion of roles and responsibilities anyway, and I'm not sure this can happen until some of the other issues happen as well. It's a sequencing issue.
Like what?
I just think I think that there's a lot of clarification that needs to happen about what are the roles and responsibilities of school boards if you move into SDs as opposed to SUs. There's a lot of clarification about what it means to be the leader of a PK-12 system at the SU superintendent level, and that has implications for what principals are freed and able to do around instructional leadership, for example, at the building level. So it may be that there's a larger conversation that needs to happen there, and you don't want to lock people until you have a sense of where they're headed.
Maybe we just don't comment on it, on the area.
Well, existing law has principals reporting to school boards as well as to superintendents.
That's
You
correct.
can't have it both ways.
That is correct.
And I'm speaking as a superintendent here, is that that can be troublesome. And if all people who report to the CEO of that operation, the superintendent, there should be line staff relationships, and the superintendent should be responsible, and the principal to the superintendent. And
I agree with you. I mean, I don't know if the level of detail at this point.
That's not what this says, though.
Right.
Right.
And I would say if our ultimate goal is to have school districts working together through a common superintendent,
You don't want.
then get rid of, you can make statute this year that just gets rid of the principal answering to school boards this year.
Yeah.
And that'll,
Yeah,
because
to
that'll.
give context, we've had school boards that have claimed that they can take over all responsibility for hiring, firing, and supervising principals, and they can cut the superintendent out of that entirely.
So if this is the right place to be putting this stuff, we should be real strong about
That's what
that
I'm
there's
saying. I have an
one
issue
line.
with it.
Yeah,
The
and I did too. I
superintendent-
was
the
very unclear. I was
superintendent
doing
needs
what
to
you were
be
doing, going,
The person who can hire and fire.
I agree.
And,
They're going to
okay,
lead.
I got your message on that one.
Can somebody propose that the legislation be changed if this doesn't happen in the statute?
It could always be amended.
I mean, because you're correct. I mean, right now, principals have to answer really to both bodies.
And be very diplomatic about it.
That's crazy.
yeah, it's a huge source of an issue.
Okay,
I suspect there's going to be additional testimony on this from groups in addition to this group.
You mean groups that want the principal to be able to do this?
Oh, I mean, you can speak to that.
Well, I think there's a universal understanding that the language that's in the draft is not getting at even what it was intended to get at. So regardless, what's in there now is not going to survive.
That's why I made the comment in my testimony that it needed some clarification.
yeah. Okay,
But we're clear in the way we think it ought to be.
yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Data-driven partnerships, quality assurance tools. Tell me what we mean here.
Oh, boy, I wouldn't get into this. Let this one go, in terms of us reporting.
I can leave this one alone, but I want to get Rebecca's thoughts on
The
it.
one substantive change, I think, in current statute is it gives you authority to direct assumption of administrative control in systems that also are fiscally out of control, not just educationally out of control. The most of that is already in statute. There's an addition that that if a system seems to be fiscally not viable for some reason, 100% turnover of staff every year for several years because they can't do a budget, that you might come in and do some kind of administrative control.
I don't have any problem with the concept. Isn't that in existing law?
Yeah.
It's an elaboration on existing law.
Okay.
But it's a level of detail that, from a philosophical point of view, that I don't think we need to be commenting on it.
Well, if it involves a takeover, that's a pretty big thing, but that doesn't mean we have to address it.
What it's asserting is that there's a public assurance responsibility for the state board in terms of making sure that our systems are viable.
Yeah.
Educationally and financially.
I'd see that as a logical extension of 165 now.
It's an extension of 165. That's exactly right.
Okay. Yield proposal and property tax adjustment lag, I don't really have any problems with that. At least as Dave Sharp is explaining it to us, in terms of just aligning fiscal years and expressing things in guaranteed yield language and so forth. Is anybody got any comment on that?
Go for it.
Ballot language,
I don't think we need to get into that.
Both those two, the yield and the ballot language, are supposed to bring transparency to what voters are voting on. They don't actually change the formula or the funding, but they're two attempts at trying to make more clear to voters on town meeting day what they're voting for.
don't you do that with the little sheets that the agency puts out each year that says what your spending is as compared to other similar structured districts of comparable size?
what we're trying to respond to is our position on this whole governance issue. And I'm not sure these two things, I mean, yeah, they're relevant to the bill, but I don't know if they're.
They're not at the center.
No. I mean, that's why I'd let it go. But,
Okay, and we agree with the moratorium business, that's,
yep.
The one thing I might even want to add in here is it talks about just because of the financial cost, but I would just add to the
Time.
the amount that's already being asked of schools into transformation right now. So not just for the cost, but really for the amount of absorbing Act 77, flexible pathways, absorbing EQS. That so put a memorandum not just for funding, but
It's capacity.
right.
That erodes capacity.
Right.
Yeah.
Because in schools, like I can tell you, even now we have two vice principals, and one now is just dealing with initiatives, and has had to change workloads, just trying to deal with how to create proficiency-based graduations, where the system's going to go in. I mean, so it's overwhelming, and we're asking so much right now. So not just cost, but as Rebecca said, capacity.
Well, it does say duties. It does say added duties.
well, we can be explicit about it.
Yeah, because it's not just it's not just
Thanks for everything.
it's workload. It's change.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, special ed payments, that was a place marker.
Yeah, we don't need to comment on it. Now, the reason this whole idea came up, during the testimony, somebody asked you a question, and we said...
Volunteered me to do something.
Right. What was the question? Have we covered that? Did
we-
you write it down?
Did we agree with the bill?
No, it was...
This was,
Oh, this was on your testimony?
this was on, yeah,
Not this morning.
last
No.
Wednesday. Yeah, I wrote it down, but I've since lost the note, so that doesn't help. But I think the memo will take care of the question.
Okay. So Bill is going to write this memo up. He's going to circulate it. We should have it by tomorrow morning. And then he'll submit it at least to the House Ed, if not Senate Ed.
I would think to both.
Okay.
And also is to copy Ally and make sure that everybody's doing the same thing.
And so are you all comfortable? I mean, I know some of you sit on the legislative committee, but are you comfortable on how we're doing this?
Yeah, because I mean, things come out, we get a chance to reply one-on-one with Bill, and from my perspective, it's worked pretty good.
Good. Krista?
My only question is, so we got this list earlier from Jill about different topics that were being covered. I know on the legislative committee that we get a chance to input. I mean, I would just be curious about other members and their input on any of these topics. So as they come up, we have a general sense because we don't get to meet with you again for another month. So I just didn't know how people felt about some of those bigger topics or...
Why don't we leave it this way instead of going through all these?
No, just like the bullets in the front even, the bigger topics, like the...
Well, we touched on the principal and superintendents.
Right.
The governance, phantom students, small schools, EQS, licensing, independent schools, we haven't.
Yes, that's in our legislative
That
agenda.
is our agenda.
Population and enrollment. So when Dave Sharp said he's holding a place for special ed, and Rebecca and then Carol talked about they're looking into it, is this, Jill, are they looking at a different way of funding special ed? Is that the idea?
Right, and we don't have a plan. I think Michael Giangreco, he had testified before both the committees. He's a professor at UVM, but he's done a lot of studying about this, about basically the way that it's funded now incentivizes the wrong kind of choices in some cases. So we prefer that they ask us to come back with a study, having met with them. By then we'll have the JFO report on the use of paraprofessionals across the state. So there's a few pieces that would inform that, but yeah, it's about how it's funded.
So it would be more like a block grant or some idea that's other than the current system.
Rather than pay for service.
Will this happen this session?
Well, what we're hoping is
Spring.
they put something in there, if they have to put anything in there, that asks us to come back with some thoughts next session. We certainly don't have anything this session.
Yeah, it's already getting late in the day for something to happen this spring.
So we're comfortable with how we're working together on this process? Yep. Okay, Bill, we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Okay, and please respond to my email quickly.
Respond just to Bill. Don't do a reply all, please.
Sean goes, one person can get away with it. She's usually.
I haven't done it.
I'm not sure if, yeah, bye, Jill. Thank you for all your help. Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to do too many iterations of this thing because.
Oh, yeah, let's, don't, let's, if you got another way to write Bill's sentence, let it go. This is just too.
Well, I don't mind editing as long as it's timely. Timeliness is the thing that kills me.
All right, let's move on to item N, Youth Education Alliance of Vermont.
Okay.
Dylan.
Kind of hard to follow that discussion, but.
So the folks have not gotten this yet, have they?
Not gotten this.
Okay. Let me give you a little background. Dylan sent me this earlier this month and was looking for me to put it on the agenda. I have mine to get our endorsement. And there's obviously when you read it, you'll see that there's an awful lot of work that's gone into this. It's a better way of bringing the students of Vermont together. And I really complimented him and think it's incredible what he's done here. However, one of the conclusions is that there'd be another whole process the way students were elected to the State Board of Education as opposed to the governor making the appointment. And so my position was I really thought this had some merit, but I thought it needed people to have some time to think about it. And so I suggested to Dylan that he present it today and that we will put it on the agenda for the March meeting. With that great introduction?
Okay, wow. So, as you know, we have that student rep email, and so through that email, I've been kind of telling you guys what's been happening. A lot of students haven't really been communicating with me through that. I've been trying to give it to them as much as I can, and as I see students outside of my school and in my school. And I thought that would be a way to hear what students have to say, but then I realized that that wasn't the greatest avenue, so I was trying to find a way to really hear what my student constituents have to say. And so I actually, through that email, I met this man named Daniel Brogan, who was the Massachusetts student rep on the board in 2014, his Massachusetts State Board. And we put this together in hopes to, for my position, or whoever holds my position in a few years, to be able to properly hear what the students have to say. And so basically this is a way for students to meet regionally, and then delegates from those regions to meet bi-monthly to talk about student issues and sort of correspond with their Board of Ed and the AOE, and just discussing issues that students have to discuss. I mean, you can look through. I don't want to go through the details right now. It's like 2:30, and we've had a long day. But you can look and see. And I think the only thing that I've changed, that I think I would change before it was endorsed by the state board, would be the whole what we talked about with the students electing their own student rep to the board. I think on the first or the third page it says Title 16, whatever. That's the title that says that the governor elects the student board member. I think instead of trying to overturn that and have this student group elect the student member to the state board, we would have them bring some finalists to the governor and then he vote on those finalists. And I would make that amendment to this document and then have you guys endorse that at the next meeting if that's what you choose to do.
So Dylan, is
Yes.
this what Massachusetts used? Is this their language, and that you would
This is their
adopted it and
language
changed it?
mostly, and we changed it to fit Vermont and what would be better for Vermont.
Okay.
And so that's basically what this is inspired by. I just want to iterate. We both say this in a cover letter that we add onto this, but basically Massachusetts has had this model. They don't call it the YEEV. They have a student advisory council is what they call it. But it's been working in their state for 44 years.
Along with New Jersey and Rhode Island, do I remember that correctly?
Mm-hmm.
So I
this
would
model has
say, take this, read it, and give Dylan some feedback, and if Dylan requests, and any changes he might make in this, we'll put this on the agenda for the March meeting. And again, I really compliment you for all the research and the work you've done on this. It's terrific.
Just to
Thank you.
clarify, to send Dylan, communicate with Dylan in between meetings about
Yes.
feedback. Okay.
Yes.
Right. If you have any questions, I know you're probably pretty bombarded right now, but if you're in reading it, you have any questions for clarification, feel free to contact me.
Yeah, and just, I really thank you for doing all this work. This is amazing. And I think we do need to get more student voice from the state of Vermont. I feel like we talk about students in the abstract, and I love that you're trying to bring more voice to the conversation. And just even as a board, as a challenge our own selves, how do we involve students more? And is it through debate? Is it through, I mean, I know I told you I was a judge for an essay contest. Do we do some more things to hear more authentic voice that's not filtered through adults? I think that would be really strong. So thank you for doing this.
Sure.
And I just think that maybe we could even piggyback on this, and what else can we do to empower our students?
Awesome. Thank you guys for your support.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is this a 14th district that we're adding?
No, it's not.
Okay, then, I approve.
So, for the last agenda item, Perry has emailed you earlier today a proposed draft of a resolution expressing our appreciation for Margaret McLean. We all had a chance to review that?
Didn't see it.
Is it this, just with the one change from previously?
I didn't see it previous. Was I?
Only a few of you saw it previously.
Here, I think I have a teeny bit.
Do you want to take 2 minutes and look at this?
Yeah.
We've seen it.
Okay. Here.
Oh,
I haven't seen it. So anybody else
Do you
have a
want
copy?
somebody to read it out loud? When
Yeah,
we
that would
approve
be
it?
probably be better.
Do you want to come?
Want me to read it?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well,
Or,
It's always nice to be read.
You're going to take a break?
I thought we were going to take a 2-minute break.
well, you can read it to us while you're taking a break.
And do you want to do that through a microphone so we can hear you?
Who's going to read it?
We are back on the record, and the issue before the State Board of Education is a certain resolution.
Yes, this is the commendation and expression of appreciation for Margaret McLean. Margaret McLean received her BA in Education from the University of Kiel in Cheshire, England in 1971, and her MA in Educational Leadership from Johnson State College in 1988. Shortly after receiving her BA, she began her career in education as a 5th grade teacher at the Glenfield Primary School in Bucolic, Leicestershire, England.
Lester.
Bless you. For the next 18 years, Margaret taught at schools in Germany, Poland, the former Soviet Union, the Netherlands, Bulgaria, and Vermont. Margaret was also principal of the Peacham School from 1989 through 2004 and was named Vermont's Principal of the Year in 1996. Since that time, Margaret has served as the Professional Development Coordinator for the Rural School and Community Trust, a national facilitator for the School Reform Initiative, and as director of the Vermont Rural Partnership. Since 2007, Margaret has been invited to present at educational conferences around the globe in such various places as Thailand, Kuwait, France, Panama, and Uganda, to name only a few. In addition, Margaret has been a consultant for schools in numerous countries as well, from Dakar to Denmark and from Brazil to Zambia, among many others. An accomplished grant writer, Margaret has secured nearly $3 million in grants over the years for various educational organizations. In February 2013, Governor Peter Sumlin named Margaret to the Vermont State Board of Education, where she has served with distinction. Margaret's contributions to the well-being of Vermont students and educational system have spanned more than 35 years. In recognition of her long-standing commitment to the education of Vermont students and her work to improve the educational opportunities for not only Vermont students, but students around the world, the Vermont State Board of Education hereby issues this commendation to Margaret McLean on this, the 17th day of February, 2015, and extends its gratitude for her hard work, dedication, and devotion to education.
Is there a motion?
I move to
Move the resolution.
Move the resolution.
Sean Marie has moved to approve the resolution. Is there a second?
Second.
And Mark has seconded. Is there discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. And the vote was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 0.
It was unanimous.
Unanimous. Well, but the chair voted too.
It was unanimous with the chair.
Yes. Is there any other business to come before this meeting? If not, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by, is there a second?
Second.
John Marie seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and we are adjourned until March 17th.
And will Peter be joining us?